Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see what if Luffy ate the mythical Kitsune fruit and made Nami the queen of the pirates. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Promise. In Orange Town the world had shrunk to the patch of dirt beneath her knees. It was a mixture of soil and her own blood, a gritty paste that clung to her skin. The knife felt heavy, a cold and hateful thing in her trembling hand. Above her, the mocking laughter of the fishmen echoed off the garish architecture of Arlong Park, a monument to her failure. 8 years. 8 years of theft, of lies, of swallowing her pride and burying her soul for a future that had just been stolen from her. The tattoo on her shoulder, Arlong's mark, burned as if freshly branded. Every face in Kokoyashi village was etched with despair. Genzo, his arms pinned, a stream of blood trickling from his temple. Nojiko, held fast, her eyes screaming the fury her mouth could not. They had tried. They had all tried to fight, and for what? To be broken against the wall of Arlong's monstrous strength. Nami's throat was raw. She had stabbed her own arm, trying to carve out the symbol of her servitude, trying to excise the poison from her very being. But it was no use. It was part of her. The shame was part of her. The failure was part of her. Her body shook with a sob that felt like it would tear her apart from the inside out. All the strength she had hoarded, all the walls she had built, crumbled into nothing. She was just a girl again, watching her mother die. The laughter died down as Arlong loomed over her, his saw-like nose casting a long, cruel shadow. See? This is your reality, human, he sneered, his voice a wet growl. You live and die by my whim. Your treasure is my treasure. Your life is my plaything. She couldn't look at him. She couldn't look at anyone. Her gaze fell upon her own bloodied arm, the tears falling freely now, hot and shameful. She had pushed them away. She had screamed at them, betrayed them, tried to make them hate her so they would leave and be safe. But they hadn't left. And now they were caught in her nightmare. The weight of it was suffocating. A single name, a last, desperate prayer, clawed its way out of her throat. It was quiet, ragged, a sound of utter surrender. Luffy, help me. The world seemed to hold its breath. The fishmen snickered. The villagers looked on in pity. A straw hat was gently placed on her head. It was so sudden, so out of place in the landscape of violence and despair, that Nami flinched. The worn brim obscured her view of the sky. It smelled of sun and sea and impossible, reckless freedom. She didn't look up, but she knew who it was. She felt him there, a silent presence that had suddenly materialized behind her. Right, was all Monkey D, Luffy said. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't the boisterous, idiotic shout she was used to. It was low, steady, and held a chilling lack of his usual cheer. It was the sound of a promise being forged in steel. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned, and the air around him seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from sun-baked asphalt. He walked toward Arlong Park. Zoro was in trouble. Pinned by the sheer weight of fishman muscle, his swords trapped, he snarled as Kurubi's fist slammed into his gut. He had underestimated them. Not their strength, but their sheer, brutal tenacity in the water that pooled around the central building. Nearby, Sanji was a whirlwind of black-suited fury, his kick sending fishmen flying, but for every one he dropped, 2 more swarmed him, dragging him toward the deeper water where he'd be at their mercy. Usopp, perched precariously on a wall, fired explosive stars with panicked precision, but it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with firecrackers. Shahahaha. Look at them squirm. Arlong boomed, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. This is the might of the fishmen. The pinnacle of evolution. Then, a flicker. It was nothing, at first. A flash of cobalt blue at the corner of Zoro's eye. A sudden, oppressive spike of heat that made the humid air feel thick and heavy. A fishman gripping Zoro's arm suddenly screamed, not in pain, but in stark, primal terror, his eyes wide and fixed on the entrance to the park. What is that?" he stammered. Luffy stood there, silhouetted against the evening sun. He was just a boy in a red vest and blue shorts, but something was profoundly wrong. Behind him, a single, ethereal tail of pure blue flame swished lazily through the air, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the laws of physics. It didn't burn the ground, yet it radiated an ancient, predatory heat. His face was unreadable, his usual wide, stupid grin completely absent. His eyes, usually so full of simple joy, were dark and incredibly old. "You," Luffy said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the din, "you made Nami cry." Arlong threw his head back and laughed, a great, booming sound of genuine amusement. "That's it? That's your grand entrance? The weak cry. It's the way of the world. Now, if you're done posturing, my men will tear you limb from," a scream from the watchtower cut him off. A fishman lookout was pointing frantically toward the sea, his face pale. "Ships. On the horizon. Marine flags. It's a buster call." Panic erupted. The words, "buster call," were a death sentence, a bogeyman the world government used to wipe islands off the map. Fishmen scrambled, dropping their weapons, their arrogance vaporized by ingrained fear. "Impossible!" Arlong roared, spinning to look. "They wouldn't dare. We have a deal with," he stopped. His eyes, sharp and predatory, narrowed. He could see them. Vague shapes, 10 massive warships, their cannons like skeletal fingers pointed at the island. But they were fuzzy, indistinct, like a poorly remembered dream. "It's a trick." But the seed was planted. The fishmen hesitated, their morale shattered. Kurubi, who had been grinding Zoro into the dirt, looked over his shoulder, his focus broken. It was the only opening Zoro needed. With a roar, he heaved, throwing the fishmen off him. Sure son. His blade was a blur, and Kurubi collapsed, a clean line bisecting his chest. Sanji, seeing his own chance, spun on the balls of his feet. "Collier shoot. Epaule." His kicks landed with brutal efficiency, snapping necks and cracking jaws as the fishmen around him were distracted by the phantom fleet. The chaos was Luffy's canvas. He moved, not with the bounding, rubbery motion they had seen before, but like a phantom. He was a blur of red and blue, the fiery tail leaving a shimmering afterimage. He appeared beside Chu, the fishman with the water cannon mouth. Before Chu could even register his presence, Luffy's hand, wreathed in the same blue fox fire, clamped over his mouth. There was no explosion, only a soft hiss, like water hitting a hot skillet. Chu's eyes went wide, and he crumpled to the ground, his lips and cheeks horribly seared. "What's happening?" a fishman screamed. "Arlong-san, give us orders. Attack the straw hat." "He's the one doing this," another voice yelled. It sounded exactly like Arlong. The real Arlong whipped his head around, his eyes wild. "That wasn't me." "Who said that?" Luffy, now disguised as a generic fishman, grinned from within the confused mob. His fruit wasn't the Gomu Gomu no Mi. He had eaten it years ago, a strange, 9-segmented fruit with a swirling pattern like a fox's brush stroke. The Hito Hito no Mi, model, Kitsune. A mythical zoan. A fruit with a will, an ancient, cunning spirit that had slowly merged with his own. It gave him the power of a trickster god, illusions, shape-shifting, and the ethereal, soul-burning flames of the Kitsune. The ground beneath their feet groaned. A deep, cracking sound echoed from the earth, and fissures of blackness, impossibly deep, began to snake across the courtyard. The fishmen cried out in terror, stumbling and falling as the very island seemed to break apart beneath them. It was another illusion, a suggestion of doom planted directly into their panicked minds, but it felt utterly real. Arlong roared in frustration. He was a king, a conqueror, the strongest of his kind. He ruled through fear and overwhelming power. This was witchcraft. It was a coward's tactic, and it was working. His crew, his unstoppable force, was being dismantled by shadows and fear. Enough. His voice was a physical shockwave. He is one man. Ignore the tricks and tear him apart. He charged, a 250-kilogram torpedo of muscle and rage. The ground buckled for real under his charge. Luffy dropped his illusions, the phantom ships and crumbling earth vanishing as if they had never been. The sudden return to reality was jarring. He stood alone in the center of the courtyard, his single fiery tail whipping back and forth in anticipation. "I've been waiting for you," Luffy said, a genuine, predatory smile finally gracing his lips. Arlong didn't bother with words. He swung, his massive, webbed hand aiming to pulp Luffy's head. Luffy vanished. He wasn't just fast, he seemed to dissolve into a flicker of blue and reappear a dozen feet away, perched on the archway of the main building. "You are quick, for a human," Arlong snarled, his eyes scanning, trying to pin down the impossible movement. "But you cannot escape me in my own domain." He leaped, clearing the distance in a single bound, his claws extended. Luffy simply stepped off the archway, falling backward into the pool below with a soft splash. "Fool!" Arlong laughed, landing where Luffy had been. "You've chosen the one place I cannot be beaten." He dove in after him, the water exploding upwards. Underwater, Arlong was a blur of unstoppable motion. He was faster, stronger, a true apex predator. He shot toward Luffy, jaws wide, ready to bite him in half. But the water around Luffy began to shimmer. The blue foxfire on his tail didn't extinguish, it burned brighter, pulsing with an unnatural light. The water around it began to boil, creating a superheated, chaotic pocket in the pool. Arlong recoiled with a hiss of pain as the scalding water washed over him. His tough hide protected him from the worst of it, but the searing heat was a shock. It was wrong. Fire shouldn't burn underwater. Luffy hung suspended in the churning chaos, his eyes open and clear. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't drowning. He looked amused. He made a gesture, and the illusion of a colossal sea king, its eyes burning with hateful light, lunged at Arlong from the murky depths of the pool. Arlong, for a split second, believed it. His warrior's instincts screamed at him. He spun to meet the threat, only to find nothing there. In that moment of distraction, Luffy struck. He didn't stretch. He propelled himself through the boiling water with a kick, his hand, still cloaked in Kitsune, slamming into Arlong's gills. The fishman roared, a muffled sound of agony, and shot to the surface, clutching his side. The burn was severe, the blue flames leaving a cauterized, blackened wound that sizzled in the open air. Luffy breached the surface moments later, landing lightly on the edge of the pool, completely dry. The water just seemed to slide off him. "You can't win by playing my game," Luffy said, his voice soft. "So I'll just change the rules. I'll kill you." Arlong bellowed, his composure utterly gone. He was wounded, humiliated, and seething with a rage that bordered on insanity. He ripped his own signature weapon, the Kiribachi, from where it was embedded in a wall. The massive saw-toothed blade was an extension of his own brutal nature. "I will tear you to pieces and feed you to the fish." He charged again, swinging the Kiribachi in a devastating arc. This time, Luffy met him head-on. He didn't dodge. He raised his arm, and it shifted, the flesh and bone reforming in a blur of motion into a hardened, obsidian-black claw, wreathed in blue fire. He caught the Kiribachi on his transformed limb, the sound of grinding metal screaming through the air. Sparks flew, not yellow, but a brilliant, ethereal blue. Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp could only watch, their own battles finished. The remaining fishmen were either unconscious or too terrified to move. This was a battle on a different level. You talk about the weak and the strong, Luffy said, his voice a low growl as he forced Arlong back, step by step. You think strength is about race? About how hard you can bite? Real strength. He looked past Arlong, his gaze finding Nami, who was now on her feet, watching with wide, unbelieving eyes from the village entrance. Is knowing what you're fighting for. With a final, guttural yell, Luffy shoved, the force of it throwing the much larger fishman off balance. Arlong stumbled back, right into the doorway of the central building. The map room. Nami's prison. This, Luffy declared, his clawed hand retracting back into a normal fist, now glowing with an impossibly dense sphere of swirling blue energy, is for the last 8 years. He didn't stretch. He moved with the explosive force of a cannonball, crossing the distance in an instant. The attack wasn't a punch. It was a release. He slammed the sphere of energy into Arlong's chest. Kitsunabe, Rasenjie. There was no grand explosion. There was a compressed implosion of sound and light. The blue energy consumed Arlong, vaporizing the water on his skin, searing his flesh, and propelling him backward like a rag doll. He crashed through his own throne, shattering it into splinters. He smashed through the far wall of the map room, the one covered in Nami's beautiful, painful, perfect charts. The maps, the tools, the desk, everything she had been forced to create for him, was obliterated in the same instant as the man who had enslaved her. The entire top floor of Arlong Park groaned, sagged, and then collapsed in on itself in a deafening roar of splintering wood and shattering stone. A cloud of dust billowed into the evening sky, a funeral pyre for a tyrant's reign. Silence. The dust began to settle. The villagers, who had been watching in terrified awe, began to process what they had just seen. Not a fight. An execution. A divine retribution delivered by a boy with a straw hat and a tale of impossible fire. From the wreckage of the tower, Luffy walked out. He wasn't even breathing hard. He was covered in dust, but otherwise unharmed. The fiery tail behind him had shrunk slightly, its light softer now, a gentle, pulsing azure. He paid no mind to the fallen fishmen or the gawking crowd. His eyes found Nami. He walked toward her, his footsteps the only sound. He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. He reached up and gently took the straw hat from her head, dusting it off before settling it back on his own. The familiar ritual felt alien now, freighted with a new and terrifying significance. Nami stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of shock, relief, and a dawning, terrifying confusion. The tears had stopped, but her face was still tracked with dirt and salt. She didn't know what to say. Thank you felt laughably inadequate. Then Luffy did something that shattered her entire understanding of him. He knelt. On one knee, in the dirt and the blood, before her. The victor kneeling to the victim. He looked up at her, and his usual carefree grin was gone, replaced by a look of such fierce, unwavering solemnity that it took her breath away. His dark eyes held hers, and in them, she saw not the simple-minded boy she thought she knew, but a kingmaker. You wanted to buy your village's freedom, he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried across the silent, ruined park. Every villager, every one of his crewmates, heard him. You wanted to chart the whole world. Those aren't the dreams of a thief, Nami. They're the dreams of a queen. Her breath hitched. A tremor went through her. Queen. What was he saying? The world took your crown, Luffy continued, his voice resonating with an unshakable conviction that seemed to settle into the very marrow of her bones. So I'm going to get it back for you. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He held her gaze, a silent vow passing between them that was more binding than any oath. I won't be Pirate King, he declared, the words echoing into a new legend. You will. And I'll be the one to make it happen. The declaration hung in the air, electric and absolute. Zoro, leaning on his swords, let a slow, knowing grin spread across his face. Sanji, ever the cavalier, immediately fell to his own knee, a look of ecstatic devotion on his face. "As you command, my queen." "And her valiant first mate." Usopp's jaw had quite literally hit the ground. Nami could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. He had just handed her freedom, and in the same breath, burdened her with a dream so immense it terrified her. He wasn't just her savior. He was her subject. Her weapon. Her first mate. The boy who was supposed to be the freest man on the seas had just willingly chained himself to her ambition. For the first time in 8 years, Nami looked out at the sea not as an escape, but as a territory. Her territory. And she began to cry again, but these tears were different. They weren't for the past. They were for the terrifying, brilliant, and utterly unknown future. Far away, in a stark, minimalist office in the heart of Marineford, the air was cold and still. The only adornment was a single, massive calligraphy scroll hanging on the wall, depicting a wrathful, 6-armed deity crushing a horde of demons underfoot. The desk was a slab of polished black marble, empty save for a single den mushi, which was currently sputtering and whining. On the other side of the desk, a marine captain, pale and sweating, stammered through his report. He was a survivor from Nozumi's corrupt unit, having watched the events at Kokoyashi village from a safe distance. "It wasn't human, sir. It moved like a ghost. There was fire, blue fire, that burned underwater. It made us see things. An entire fleet. The ground splitting open. Then he turned his arm into a claw of black glass and just erased him. He erased Arlong." The captain was trembling, his voice cracking with trauma. "And the tail, sir. It had a tail made of fire. Like a demon, a fox demon." High Admiral Kageyama sat perfectly still in the shadows, his face obscured. The only thing visible was the faint, menacing glow of his eyes. He was a man who radiated an aura of absolute, unyielding order. His very presence seemed to suck the chaos out of the room, leaving only a heavy, oppressive silence. He listened to the captain's terrified babbling without a single change in expression. He had dedicated his life to a singular philosophy, that true peace, true justice, could only be achieved through absolute control. Freedom was a cancer, a path to chaos that bred piracy, rebellion, and suffering. The world government was the surgeon, and its laws were the scalpel. When the captain finally fell silent, Kageyama spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the sound of judgment itself. "Mythical Zoan, model, Kitsune," he stated, not as a question, but as a diagnosis. An agent of chaos. A failed deity, given form. He had studied the ancient texts. He knew of the fruits that were not merely tools, but vessels of divine or demonic will. The sun god, Nika, who embodied liberation. The Azura, his own power, which embodied wrathful order. And the Kitsune, the celestial trickster, whose very nature was to bend and break reality for its own amusement. He steepled his long, elegant fingers. The emergence of such a power, untamed and in the hands of a lawless fool like Monkey D. Luffy, was not a mere criminal matter. It was a disruption to the fundamental balance of the world. A crack in the foundation of the absolute justice he sought to build. "Monitor the anomaly," Kageyama said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of an unbreakable command. "Track its path. Report all manifestations of its power. The balance must be preserved." The terrified captain scrambled to acknowledge the order and fled the room. Kageyama remained in the darkness, his gaze fixed on the scroll of the Azura. A flicker of something ancient and wrathful stirred within him. The fox had been let out of its den. Now, the hunter had to be unleashed. Chapter 2, The Oath and the Cherry Blossoms. The sea air, usually a balm to Nami's soul, felt different now. It was charged with a new kind of tension, the quiet hum of a promise that had fundamentally altered the world. They had fled Kokoyashi in a storm of celebration and tears, leaving behind a village that was finally, blessedly free. But on the deck of the Going Merry, a new and fragile kingdom was taking shape. Nami stood at the railing, her gaze lost on the horizon where the outline of her home had finally vanished. Her hand instinctively went to her shoulder, where Dr. Nako had skillfully replaced the hated Arlong tattoo with a new design, a pinwheel and a tangerine, a symbol of her past reclaimed, not erased. It felt right. But it was the invisible weight on her head that preoccupied her. A phantom crown. "You're thinking too loud," a voice said from beside her. She glanced over. Zoro was leaning against the mast, arms crossed, one eye open and appraising her. He wasn't mocking her, it was a simple statement of fact. "I don't know how to do this, Zoro," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He just said it. And you all just accepted it. Zoro pushed himself off the mast and walked over to the railing, his three swords clinking softly. He stared out at the same horizon. What's to accept? The idiot made up his mind. And it wasn't a bad decision. Not a bad decision. Nami sputtered, turning to face him. He gave up his dream. For me. A dream he's had his entire life. And he expects me to just, what? Become the Pirate Queen? The title still sounded absurd on her tongue. He didn't give it up, Zoro corrected, his tone surprisingly patient. He just changed the objective. The adventure is the same. The goal is the same, to conquer the Grand Line and find the One Piece. He just decided you'd be better at holding the title at the end. He finally looked at her, his gaze sharp and serious. He's not wrong. You're the smartest person on this ship. Luffy's power is chaos. It needs a direction. An anchor. He chose you to be it. Before she could process that, a whirlwind of adoration and culinary delight descended. Nami Swain. My glorious queen. I have prepared a royal refreshment to soothe your regal mind. A tangerine spritzer with a hint of mint. Sanji appeared, one leg bent in an elegant bow, holding a tall, sweating glass on a silver tray. He was completely, unironically, on board with this new reality. Luffy, who had been trying to teach a confused Usopp how to juggle with three small, harmless orbs of blue fox fire, bounded over. Ooh, that looks good. Can I have some? This is for the queen, you demonic-tailed buffoon. Sanji snapped, kicking lightly in Luffy's direction. Luffy just laughed, easily dodging. The single, fiery tail behind him gave a cheerful little flick. He looked at Nami, his head tilted. Are you still worried? Of course I'm worried, she shot back, the stress bubbling over. This is insane, Luffy. We don't have a plan. We don't have a proper crew. We're just sailing into the most dangerous sea in the world with a half-baked proclamation. Luffy's grin didn't falter. He simply pointed at her. You'll make the plan. That's your job. He then pointed to Zoro. He'll cut anything that gets in the way. He pointed to Sanji. He'll make sure we eat. He pointed to Usopp, who promptly fumbled the fiery orbs, which dissipated harmlessly. And he'll, tell everyone how great you are. Hey! Usopp protested. It was so simple. So incredibly, infuriatingly simple. And yet, it made a terrifying kind of sense. He wasn't asking her to do it alone. He was just asking her to lead. She took a deep breath, the salty air finally clearing her head. She took the glass from Sanji. Thank you, Sanji. It's perfect. She then looked at the assembled crew. Her crew. All right. Zoro's right. The goal is the same. We need supplies, we need a better sense of what we're sailing into, and we need to be prepared for anything. Our next stop is Logue Town. It's the last stop before the Grand Line. We'll stock up there. And I mean stock up. This isn't a supply run, it's a military mobilization. I want a full manifest of everything we have, and a list of everything we need, down to the last bandage and bullet. The shift in her tone was palpable. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by the crisp, commanding authority of the woman who had managed to scrape together nearly 100 million berries on her own. Sanji snapped to attention. Yes, Nami Swan. I will prepare a list of culinary necessities for a voyage of conquest. Zoro gave a gruff nod. I need whetstones. Good ones. Usopp, catching the new mood, puffed out his chest. Leave it to the great Captain Usopp, the Queen's first marksman. I shall procure all manner of gunpowder and exotic projectiles. Nami looked at Luffy, who was beaming, his pride in her shining brighter than the fiery tail behind him. And you, she said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her worry. You will try not to get into trouble. Luffy's grin widened. No promises. Logue Town was a city buzzing with ghosts and ambition. The specter of Gold Roger, the Pirate King, hung in the air, a constant reminder of the dream that drew countless pirates here. It was the city of the beginning and the end. For Nami, it was the first real test of her new role. Okay, here's the plan, she announced, spreading a map of the city on the deck of the Mary. They were docked in a less than reputable corner of the port, away from the main marine patrols. The city is divided into districts. Sanji, the market district is here. I've allocated you a budget for 6 months' worth of non-perishables. Stick to it. Zoro, she tapped a section near the city center, the armory and weapon shops are concentrated in this quadrant. Don't buy anything cursed. Usopp, the back alleys and curiosity shops are your territory. Look for gadgets, dials, anything unusual, but focus on essentials like gunpowder and fuses. Luffy. She paused, looking at him. He was vibrating with an almost painful level of excitement, his eyes darting everywhere. Sending him on a mission for supplies was like using a cannon to kill a fly. It would be messy and attract far too much attention. Luffy, you're with me, she decided. We're going to the central square. The execution platform? Usopp squeaked. They say it's crawling with marines. Exactly, Nami said. Her expression grim. The biggest threat in this town is the marine captain stationed here. White chased Smoker. He's a Logia user, ate the plume fruit. You can't hit him, and he supposedly never let a single pirate escape this island. I want to see him. I want to know what we're up against. It was a bold, almost reckless move, but it was calculated. She needed to understand the obstacles the Grand Line would throw at them, and Smoker was the gatekeeper. As they walked through the bustling streets, the new dynamic was clear. Nami led, navigating the crowds with purpose, while Luffy followed a half-step behind, a silent, watchful guardian. His fiery tail was gone, suppressed by an act of will. To any casual observer, he was just a lanky kid in a straw hat. But Nami could feel the power coiled within him, a low thrum of energy just beneath his skin. They reached the central square. It was a vast, open space, dominated by the grim wooden scaffold where the Pirate King had met his end. Tourists and pirates alike milled about, some posing for pictures, others staring up at the platform with a kind of religious reverence. And standing at the base, a pillar of smoke and authority, was the man himself. Captain Smoker was an imposing figure, with stark white hair and 2 thick cigars clenched in his teeth. He radiated an aura of cynical, world-weary menace. His eyes, sharp and predatory, swept over the crowd, missing nothing. They fell on Luffy, and for a split second, they widened in recognition of the bounty poster. Straw Hat Luffy, Smoker's voice was a low rumble, like gravel being churned. Your luck runs out here. The square went quiet. Civilians scrambled to get away. Smoker's lower half dissolved into a billow of thick white smoke, and he shot toward them, his jutty, tipped with sea stone, held ready. Luffy, run! Nami yelled, grabbing his arm. But Luffy didn't move. He just grinned. Nami, he said, his voice laced with mischief. Do you trust me? What? This is no time for, trust me, he repeated, his eyes sparkling. She looked from his confident face to the rapidly approaching cloud of smoke. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was it. The first real test. Her strategy against his chaos. She had to choose. I trust you, she breathed. Good, he said. And the world went sideways. One moment, Smoker was bearing down on them. The next, Luffy and Nami were gone. Not vanished in a burst of speed, but simply, not there anymore. Smoker shot through the space they had occupied, his jetty hitting empty air. He reformed, his head whipping around in confusion. Where did they go? He snarled. From atop a nearby roof, Luffy waved down at him. Up here, Smokey. Smoker launched himself upwards in a plume of smoke, but as he reached the roof, Luffy was gone again, now standing in the middle of the street, juggling 3 oranges he'd apparently swiped from a nearby cart. The crowd gasped and murmured. The chase was on. But it was a chase on Luffy's terms. He led Smoker through the winding streets of Logue Town, turning the city into his personal playground. When Smoker tried to trap him in an alley, Luffy simply ran straight at the wall. Smoker smirked, expecting him to be cornered, but Luffy passed right through it, leaving a shimmering, cartoonish hole in the brickwork for a second before it faded. The wall was an illusion. Smoker, unable to stop his momentum, crashed headfirst into the very real bricks behind it. He roared in frustration, emerging from the dust and pursued Luffy into a crowded marketplace. Clear out, he bellowed. This is marine business. Luffy, weaving through the stalls, giggled. He flicked his wrist, and suddenly, the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. To Smoker, it looked like every stall had transformed into a cage, trapping him. To the civilians, it looked like a spontaneous festival had erupted, with confetti and streamers made of blue light falling from the sky. To a pickpocket trying to take advantage of the chaos, it looked like every purse he tried to grab turned into a snapping turtle. Luffy was tailoring the illusion, projecting specific images into specific minds, sowing maximum confusion with minimum effort. He wasn't just creating a single false image, he was conducting a symphony of deceit. Smoker, enraged, unleashed his power. White out. A massive cloud of smoke erupted from him, intending to envelop the entire market and capture Luffy within it. But as the smoke cleared, there were 100 Luffys, all with straw hats and goofy grins, all pointing at him and laughing. Which one is real, Smokey? They all taunted in unison. Smoker's haki flared, his senses reaching out to find the true presence among the fakes. He pinpointed one, lashing out with his jutty. The illusion dissipated. He struck another. It vanished. He was a man trying to punch fog, and with every failed attempt, the laughter from the crowd grew louder. The invincible, white-chased Smoker, the terror of Logue Town, was being made a fool of. Luffy, the real one, was perched comfortably on the execution platform, watching the show with Nami, who he had deposited there in the first moments of the chase. She stared, utterly dumbfounded. This wasn't a fight. It was a performance. A calculated act of psychological warfare that was systematically dismantling Smoker's reputation and authority. He can't touch you, Nami breathed, finally understanding. Even with his haki, your illusions are too layered, too chaotic. You're not tricking his senses, you're tricking his brain. Yup. Luffy chirped. The Kitsune doesn't like being caged. Down below, Smoker finally managed to dispel the last of the clones, his face a mask of thunderous fury. His eyes scanned the square and finally locked onto the platform. He saw Luffy and Nami, and his rage hit a boiling point. Straw Hat, he bellowed, launching himself toward them, a missile of white smoke and vengeance. Luffy stood up, a genuine, challenging smile on his face. Okay, playtime's over. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with Luffy or Smoker. A sudden, powerful gust of wind, green and smelling of ozone, swept through the square. It was unnatural, a focused blast that seemed to originate from nowhere. As it washed over Smoker, the illusion he was locked onto flickered and died. He was charging at an empty platform. Luffy and Nami were already halfway down a side street, blending into the panicked crowd. Luffy glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes drawn to a figure in a green cloak standing in the shadows of an opposing building. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. The man was tall, with a strange tattoo on his face, and his gaze was intense, ancient, and familiar. It was a look of acknowledgement, a silent nod from one storm to another. Then, the man turned and was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Who was that? Nami asked, having caught the glance. I don't know, Luffy said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. But he felt loud. They rendezvoused with the others at the Mary, their arms laden with supplies. The story of Luffy's humiliation of Smoker had already spread through the port like wildfire, a new and exciting chapter in the legend of Gold Roger's town. As they set sail, riding the currents toward the looming shadow of Reverse Mountain, a sense of triumph filled the air. Nami, standing at the helm, felt a surge of confidence. She had made a call, trusted her first mate, and they had won. Not through brute force, but through cunning. Her kind of victory. But the sea is a fickle mistress. Days later, as they navigated the treacherous waters leading to the Grand Line, a sudden, violent fever took hold of Nami. She collapsed at the helm, her skin burning, her breathing ragged. Her temperature is over 104. Usopp cried, wringing his hands. We have to find a doctor. Vivi, the princess of Alabasta whom they had picked up at Whiskey Peak, consulted a map with a worried frown. There's an island nearby, but the log pose isn't pointing to it. It's a winter island called Drum. But we're on a schedule. My country is on the brink of civil war. We have to get to Alabasta. They found the island shrouded in a perpetual blizzard. It was a stark, vertical kingdom, with mountains shaped like massive drums. The moment they made landfall, they were met with hostility. The villagers were terrified, speaking of a selfish king named Wapol who had driven out all the doctors save for one, who lived at the top of the highest, most treacherous mountain. This was Nami's first true test as queen. Lying in a makeshift sickbed in the Mary's cabin, sweat beading on her forehead, she listened as Vivi and Sanji argued. We cannot afford a detour. Vivi insisted, her voice tight with desperation. Every day we waste is a day Crocodile's plan comes closer to fruition. Millions of lives are at stake. And Nami-san's life is not. Sanji retorted, his voice dangerously low. We are going up that mountain to find that doctor, even if I have to carry Nami-san on my back myself. Nami closed her eyes, her head pounding. The pragmatic, logical part of her, the part that had survived for 8 years, agreed with Vivi. Alabasta was the mission. It was a kingdom. Its problems were bigger than her own. Her old self would have ordered them to press on, to find another way. But she wasn't her old self. She was a queen now, Luffy had said so. What kind of queen puts a schedule before the life of her crew? What kind of leader turns a blind eye to a nation suffering under a tyrant, just like her own had? She remembered Arlong's laughter, the despair in her village's eyes. The people of Drum, she realized, were her people too, in a way. They were the oppressed, the forgotten, the victims of a selfish monarch. She struggled to sit up, her body trembling with effort. Zoro steadied her. Luffy, she called out, her voice weak but firm. Luffy, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, was at her side in an instant. I'm here. She looked from Vivi's desperate face to Luffy's waiting one. She made her decision. Vivi. I'm sorry. But we're not leaving. A queen doesn't abandon those in need. Not her own people, and not others she has the power to help. Her voice gained strength, fueled by conviction. We're going to find that doctor. And while we're at it, we're liberating this island. Vivi stared, shocked, but then her expression softened into one of dawning respect. She bowed her head. I understand. Your Majesty. The word sent a shiver down Nami's spine, but she didn't let it show. She had made her decree. The climb was a frozen hell. Luffy, with Nami strapped securely to his back, and Sanji, carrying a pack of supplies, scaled the sheer cliff face of the tallest drum rock. The blizzard was relentless, the cold so intense it felt like shards of glass against their skin. They fought off giant, carnivorous rabbits and endured a catastrophic avalanche started by the island's tyrannical king, Wapol, who had returned to reclaim his castle. Sanji was injured, his leg broken, but he ordered Luffy to go on. Luffy, his jaw set with grim determination, continued the ascent alone, Nami's feverish, unconscious form a precious weight on his shoulders. He climbed with his bare hands and feet, the rock tearing at his skin, his own body temperature the only thing keeping them from freezing solid. He finally reached the summit, collapsing at the entrance of the castle. He had made it. Inside, they found the witch, Dr. Kureha, a 139-year-old woman with the energy of a teenager, and her assistant, a small, blue-nosed reindeer who could walk and talk like a man, Tony Chopper. He was the doctor they needed. While Chopper worked frantically to save Nami's life, Wapol and his cronies finally arrived, intent on taking back their home. Luffy, exhausted but resolute, stood to face them. But it was Chopper, fueled by a tragic past and the dying wish of his mentor, Dr. Hirulek, who confronted them first. Wapol, a grotesque man with a mouth that could unhinge to consume anything, just laughed. This is my kingdom. Everything in it is mine. He pointed a cannon at the castle roof, where a tattered black flag with a skull and crossbones and falling cherry petals flew from the highest spire. Including that disgusting flag your crackpot master loved so much. The flag was Dr. Hirulek's symbol of defiance, a pirate flag he flew to represent his belief in a cure for all diseases, his dream of making cherry blossoms bloom on the winter island. To Chopper, it was his mentor's very soul. Don't you dare touch that flag! Chopper cried, transforming into his muscular heavy point. But Wapol just grinned, lighting the fuse. Luffy appeared in front of the cannon, a blur of motion. He didn't attack Wapol. He stood with his back to them, facing the flagpole, his arms spread wide. Get out of the way, Straw Hat! Wapol bellowed. I have no quarrel with you. Luffy didn't turn. His voice was dangerously calm. This isn't your flag, is it, Chopper? No. Chopper yelled, tears in his eyes. It's Dr. Hirulek's. It's proof he existed. I see, Luffy said. He glanced up at the tattered banner, waving defiantly in the frozen wind. He felt a strange resonance with it. His fruit, the Kitsune, was a creature of spirit and will. It recognized the powerful belief invested in that simple piece of cloth. It wasn't just a flag, it was a testament, a nation's soul embodied in a symbol of rebellion. It was a dream made manifest. Protecting it was not a choice, it was a duty. Then I won't let them break it, Luffy declared. He stood there, an immovable object, and took the full force of the cannonball in his back. The explosion rocked the tower, but Luffy didn't budge an inch. The flag behind him remained untouched. Wapol stared in disbelief. Chopper stared in awe. Luffy turned around, smoke rising from his red vest, his face dark with a righteous fury. The air around him crackled. Now, he said, his voice a low growl. I'm pissed. The fight was short and brutal. Wapol's Baku no Mi allowed him to eat anything and incorporate its properties into his body. He ate his own minions to combine into a stronger form. He ate cannons to turn his arms into weapons. But he was fighting a force of nature. Luffy's movements were fluid and unpredictable. He used his illusions to make Wapol see a feast, causing him to try and eat the stone floor. He transformed into a tiny, nine-tailed fox of blue flame, zipping around the lumbering king, searing him with Kitsune with every pass. Finally, he trapped Wapol in a disorienting illusion of being at the bottom of the sea, causing him to panic and giving Luffy the opening he needed. He didn't use a fiery punch. He just appeared in front of the tyrant, his hand open. "A king who eats his own country," Luffy said. His voice cold. "You don't deserve a kingdom." With a single, explosive clap of his hands, he generated a shockwave of pure concussive force that sent Wapol flying into the horizon, a comical twinkle in the distant sky. As silence fell on the mountaintop, Dr. Kureha emerged, Nami walking beside her, weak but lucid. She had seen the end of the fight. She had seen Luffy defend the flag. "The fool actually did it," Kureha chuckled, lighting a cigarette. She turned to Chopper. "Hirolik's research is complete. It's time." She led them outside and fired a cannon into the sky. But it wasn't a normal cannonball. It was a shell packed with the red dust Hirolik had spent his life creating. It exploded high in the atmosphere, and as the dust mingled with the snow, the world changed. The falling snowflakes turned a soft, vibrant pink. The entire island was blanketed in a storm of impossible cherry blossoms, blooming in the dead of winter. Hirolik's dream, realized. The sight was breathtaking. A miracle. Nami watched, her eyes wide with wonder. The villagers below cheered, their hope restored. Luffy stood beside her, a wide, satisfied grin on his face. He had fulfilled his queen's decree. He had liberated a nation. He had protected its soul. And in that moment of profound, world-altering success, he felt a surge of power, a deep, resonant thrum from the ancient spirit within him. It was a feeling of rightness, of purpose fulfilled. Nami gasped as, behind him, a second tail of ethereal blue flame erupted into existence, flickering into life beside the first. It was longer, more vibrant, a visible mark of his growing power and stature. Chopper, tears streaming down his face as he watched the pink snow, looked from the miracle in the sky to the boy with two fiery tails. He saw Nami, the woman whose command had set these events in motion. He saw a crew that didn't just fight for treasure, but for dreams. He ran forward and bowed, his head touching the snow. "Please," he begged, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me join your crew. I want to be a pirate. I will serve you, Queen Nami. I will be your doctor and protect you and your first mate with my life." Nami looked at the earnest, blue-nosed reindeer, then at Luffy, whose two tails now swayed gently in the pink-tinged wind. She smiled, a true, warm smile that reached her eyes. Her kingdom had just gained its first royal physician. Miles away, plowing through the turbulent waters of the Grand Line at a terrifying speed, was a sleek, black marine vessel. It was built for pursuit, its hull reinforced with obsidian plates and its sails dyed a stark, intimidating black. At its prow stood a man who seemed carved from granite. This was Vice Admiral Onimaru, known in the Marines as the Bloodhound. He was a tall, unervingly gaunt man with a shaven head tattooed with complex, geometric patterns. His eyes were a pale, piercing gray, and they saw more than most. He had consumed the Inu Inu no Mi model, Okuri Inu, a mythical zoan that gave him the abilities of a legendary escorting wolf spirit. He could track any target across any distance by its life force, its very essence. He had been tracking the Kitsune's chaotic energy signature since Logue Town. It was a vibrant, flickering flame on his preternatural senses. He had felt it falter, then climb the Drum Rockies. He had felt the spike of combat. And then, he felt it surge. A massive, echoing pulse of power that was qualitatively different from before. It was deeper, more stable, more potent. "Vice Admiral," a subordinate called out, approaching him cautiously. "Our long-range sensors picked up a massive energy reading from the direction of Drum Island. It matches the profile of the target." Onimaru didn't turn. His pale eyes were fixed on the horizon, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. He could feel it. The fox had grown a second tail. The trail was getting hotter. "Adjust our course," Onimaru commanded, his voice a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. The hunt is on. Chapter 3, The Queen's Gambit in the Desert. The heat of the Alabasta Desert was a physical blow. It was a dry, suffocating blanket that leached the moisture from your skin and the energy from your bones. The sun was a merciless white eye in a vast, cloudless sky. For the Straw Hat Pirates, fresh from the frozen peaks of Drum Island, the transition was brutal. "I'm melting." Usopp groaned, draped over the Mary's railing like a wet noodle. Chopper, not yet used to his new sea legs, was panting heavily in the sliver of shade cast by the mainsail, his fur making the heat a double misery. But Nami felt alive. She stood at the ship's prow, a wide-brimmed hat protecting her face, her gaze fixed on the endless coastline of sand. This was a land of navigation, of weather patterns, of subtle shifts in wind and terrain. It was a puzzle, and she was born to solve puzzles. The title of queen, which had once felt like a costume, was beginning to feel like a second skin. Drum Island had proven that her decisions had weight, that her commands could change the fate of nations. Alabasta would be the true test. Vivi stood beside her, her expression a mask of anxiety and grim determination. She had spent the voyage briefing them, her voice tight with urgency, painting a devastating picture of their enemy. Crocodile. A warlord of the sea, a national hero to the public, and a shadow puppeteer orchestrating a civil war to seize control of her country. His organization, Baroque Works, was a web of elite assassins and spies that had infiltrated every level of Alabastan society. "He controls the rain," Vivi had explained, her fists clenched. "He uses a substance called dance powder to make it rain in the capital, Alyabarna, while the rest of the country suffers a crippling drought. He's framed my father, the king, for stealing the rain, and has instigated a rebellion. The rebel army, led by my childhood friend, Koza, is marching on the capital. They believe they're fighting for justice, but they're playing right into Crocodile's hands. He wants them to destroy each other so he can swoop in as the savior." Listening to the plan, Luffy, who was attempting to fish with a piece of meat tied to a line, had simply said, "So, we just find this crocodile guy and I'll kick his ass." The old Nami would have agreed. Find the bad guy, punch the bad guy, problem solved. But the new Nami, the Queen Nami, saw the bigger picture. This wasn't a brawl. It was a war of intelligence. "No," Nami said, her voice cutting through the heat-shimmering air. She unrolled a map of Alabasta on a nearby crate, weighting the corners with spare cannonballs. The crew gathered around, their attention immediate and absolute. A direct assault on Crocodile is what he'd expect from a pirate crew. It's clumsy. We'd be walking into his territory, playing by his rules. We're not going to do that. She tapped the port city of Nanohana, their current destination. We make landfall here. This is where the rebel army is gathering its strength. Vivi, you will go to them. You will try to talk to Koza. He won't listen. Vivi protested. He's too convinced that my father is the enemy. I know, Nami said calmly. Your mission isn't to stop him. It's to delay him. Sow doubt. Buy us time. You're the princess, your words still carry weight, even if he doesn't believe them. You are the hope of the people. Play that part. Vivi looked taken aback, but nodded, understanding the cold logic. Nami's finger then slid across the map to a city deep in the desert. Rain Base. The City of Dreams. It's a massive casino hub run by Crocodile himself. It's his seat of power. Sanji, Zoro, you're going there. A frontal assault, then? Zoro asked, a predatory grin touching his lips. The opposite, Nami replied, a cunning light in her eyes. You're not going as pirates. You're going as high rollers. Baroque Works is a secret organization. Its members don't know each other's faces, only code names. You will be loud, flashy, and spend money. You'll attract attention. The kind of attention that gets you noticed by the inner circle. Your job is to infiltrate, identify the key officers, and learn everything you can about their command structure. Sanji lit a cigarette, a puff of smoke curling into the hot air. A stealth and information mission. Understood, my queen. I shall be the most dashing spy the world has ever seen. Nami then looked at Usopp and Chopper. You two are our mobile support. You'll stay near the coast, monitoring communications, and be ready to move supplies or act as a relay. Your mission is the most important, stay hidden and stay ready. Finally, all eyes fell on Luffy. He had stopped fishing, his head tilted, listening intently. His two fiery tails swished slowly, stirring the dead air. And what about me? He asked. Nami smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. You, Luffy, are my ultimate weapon. You're not going to be a soldier. You're going to be a ghost. A rumor. A force of chaos. She pointed to a dozen different locations on the map, remote oases, supply depots, known Baroque works outposts. Crocodile's entire plan relies on control. He controls the information, the resources, the rebellion. You are going to break that control. You will shape-shift. Become a Baroque works officer and deliver false orders. Create mirages of vast oases to lead their armies astray in the desert. Destroy their supply lines, but do it quietly, leaving no trace but confusion. You won't be Straw Hat Luffy. You'll be a sand wraith, a desert demon, a ghost story the soldiers tell each other around the campfire. You will make Crocodile's agents doubt their own eyes and ears. You will make them paranoid. You will unravel his network from the inside out, thread by single thread. The crew was silent, stunned by the sheer audacity and complexity of the plan. It was a multi-pronged strategy of deception, infiltration, and psychological warfare. It wasn't a pirate's plan. It was a queen's gambit. Luffy's grin was wider than the horizon. So I get to play tricks on everybody. Shishishi. I love this plan. He wasn't just following orders. He understood the core of the strategy perfectly. His power wasn't for brute force. It was for this. To bend reality, to sow discord, to be the agent of chaos that dismantles order. This was how they would conquer a kingdom. Not with a fist, but with a whisper. The city of Yuba was a ghost town, its wells turned to dust, its people long gone. It was supposed to be the headquarters of the rebel army, but now it was just a sun-bleached skeleton in the sand. Vivi, having failed to reason with the forward elements of the rebellion, stood in the ruins of the town square, her heart heavy with failure. Her childhood friend, Koza, was marching his army toward a massacre, and she had been powerless to stop it. Hope is not a strategy, Vivi. The words echoed in her mind. Nami's words. She had been so certain, so clinical. Now, standing in the face of this desolate reality, Vivi finally understood. Her love for her country, her hope for a peaceful resolution, they were noble, but they were not weapons. A figure shimmered in the heat haze. Luffy appeared, walking out of the desert as if he were just strolling through a park. He wasn't even sweating. His two tails of blue flame seemed to absorb the oppressive heat, their light a cool, calming azure. No luck? He asked, his voice gentle. Vivi shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. They won't listen. They're too far gone. Nami's plan, my part failed. Nope, Luffy said simply. He tossed her a water skin. She didn't expect you to succeed. She just needed you to try. He looked out at the vast, empty desert. Your job was to be the heart. To remind everyone what they were fighting for. Now it's our turn to be the fist. He turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. The simple-minded boy was gone, replaced by the decisive commander she was beginning to see more and more often. Nami told me to find you. She said to tell you the game has changed. We're moving to the endgame. Before Vivi could ask what he meant, Luffy's form flickered. His features softened, his height shifted, his clothes melted and reformed. In the span of a breath, he was no longer Luffy. Standing before her was a perfect replica of her father, King Nefertari Cobra, his face etched with a look of stern authority. Luffy? Vivi gasped, stumbling back. Shishishi. Pretty good, right? Came Luffy's voice from the king's mouth. He then straightened his posture, and the king's voice, a perfect imitation, boomed across the empty square. My people of Alabasta. I have been deceived. Vivi stared, her mind reeling as she began to understand the terrifying new phase of Nami's plan. They weren't just fighting Baroque works anymore. They were going to hijack the entire narrative of the war. Meanwhile, in the neon-drenched oasis of Rain Base, Zoro and Sanji were making a scene. Sanji, in a ridiculously flamboyant white suit, was throwing chips around a roulette table with abandon, charming every woman in a 5-foot radius and insulting every man. Zoro, looking profoundly uncomfortable in a crisp black yukata, was ordering the most expensive sake in the casino and systematically drinking the bar dry, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his 3 swords, which he had refused to check at the door. They were loud, arrogant, and clearly powerful. They bled money and confidence. Exactly as Nami had instructed. It didn't take long. A man in a vulture-themed mask and a woman with a spiky, punk rock aesthetic approached their table. They moved with the quiet deadliness of predators. You're making quite a splash, the woman said, her voice a low purr. We haven't seen your faces before. Who do you work for? Sanji blew a perfect smoke ring. We work for ourselves. But we're always looking for new and profitable ventures. He gave the woman, whom he recognized from a bounty poster as Miss Doublefinger, a smoldering look. The man, Mr. One, remained impassive, his arms crossed. His entire body seemed to be made of tempered steel. Baroque Works has a monopoly on profitable ventures in this country. If you wish to operate here, you pay a tax. Or you join. Zoro took a long swallow of sake, then set the cup down with a sharp click. We're not interested in paying taxes, he said, his voice a low rumble. But we might be interested in a hostile takeover. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was the moment. The invitation into the viper's nest. Mr. One's eyes narrowed. Bold words. Mr. Zero has an appreciation for boldness. He also has a tendency to make examples of fools. Follow us. He will decide which category you fall into. As they were led through the gilded, secret corridors of the Rain Dinner's casino, Sanji and Zoro exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod. They were in. The desert was a canvas of lies. Miles away from Yuba, a large contingent of the rebel army was marching toward their doom. Their commander, a hot-headed but determined man, pointed to the horizon. Look! Water! Just as the informant said. In the distance, shimmering under the brutal sun, was a vast, crystal-clear lake, surrounded by lush palm trees. A true oasis. A miracle. With a joyous roar, the soldiers broke ranks, stampeding toward it, their discipline forgotten in the face of life-saving water. They ran for miles, their throats raw, their hopes soaring, only to find more sand. The oasis dissolved before their eyes, a cruel mirage. They collapsed, exhausted, dehydrated, and demoralized. From a high dune miles away, Luffy watched them, his form that of a nondescript Baroque Works agent. He felt a pang of guilt. They were good men, fighting for what they believed in. But they were a weapon aimed at Vivi's heart, and he had to disarm it. With a sigh, he turned and melted back into the desert. He had a dozen more lies to tell before sunrise. His work was creating whispers, then rumors, then outright panic within Baroque Works' lower ranks. Orders were being contradicted. Supply caravans vanished without a trace, their guards found wandering the desert, dazed and confused, with no memory of what had happened. Trusted officers were seen in 2 places at once. The meticulous, clockwork precision of Crocodile's organization was beginning to grind to a halt, gummed up by 1,000 tiny acts of sabotage. The reports filtering up to Crocodile were maddeningly inconsistent. He sat in his opulent office beneath the rain dinners, a golden hook gleaming where his left hand should be, a cigar smoldering in his right. His primary officer, the enigmatic Miss All Sunday, Nico Robin, stood before him, delivering the latest news. And the 3rd unit has been led astray by a phantom oasis, Mr. Zero, she reported, her voice calm and even. The description matches the incidents near Katoria. The agents all report seeing a fellow officer give them the new coordinates, but none can agree on who it was. Crocodile took a long drag from his cigar, the smoke curling around his scarred face. This isn't incompetence. This is sabotage. It's coordinated, but there's no pattern. It's chaotic. He looked at Robin, his eyes cold and reptilian. The princess is still with the straw hats. This has their stench all over it. But their captain is a simple-minded brute. This is too subtle for him. Perhaps you underestimate him, Robin suggested, her expression unreadable. I underestimate no one, Crocodile snarled. Find them. Find the source of this chaos. I want them brought to Rain Base. I will deal with them personally. My plan is on a knife's edge. I will not have it ruined by the meddling of children. He didn't know how right he was. The source of the chaos was already on its way. But another hunter was also closing in. On a black ship cutting through the waves just off the Alabastan coast, Vice Admiral Onimara stood at the prow, his head cocked as if listening to a distant sound. The chaotic energy signature of the Kitsune, which had been a single point of light on his senses, had splintered. It was everywhere. It flared up in the great sandy desert, then echoed from the port of Nanohana, then pulsed from the city of Rain Base itself. It wasn't that the Kitsune was in multiple places at once. It was leaving traces of its power, echoes of its illusions, scattered across the kingdom like breadcrumbs. It was a deliberate attempt to confuse a tracker. Onimara let a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Clever, he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. It knows it's being hunted. It's trying to muddy the waters. Vice Admiral, which signal should we pursue? His subordinate asked, looking at a fluctuating energy monitor. They're all over the country. Onimaru closed his pale eyes. The Okyuinu spirit within him was not so easily fooled. It didn't just track energy, it tracked intent. It could smell the life force, the will, behind the power. Most of the signals were faint, hollow echoes. But one was a bright, burning flame of pure, unadulterated will. It was moving fast, cutting a swath through the desert, leaving a trail of beautiful, terrible lies in its wake. Ignore the echoes, Onimaru commanded, his eyes snapping open. Follow the fire. It is trying to burn down the desert. He pointed a long, bony finger directly inland. There. The heart of the storm. He could feel it. The fox and the crocodile were on a collision course. And he would be there to claim the victor's spoils. The hunt was no longer a simple pursuit. It had become a race. Chapter 4, The Fox, the Crocodile, and the Glass. The air in the VIP lounge of the Rain Dinners Casino was thick with the stench of cheap perfume and expensive cruelty. Crocodile sat on a plush velvet couch, his golden hook resting on his knee, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Before him stood Zoro and Sanji, flanked by Mr. One and Miss Doublefinger. The rest of the officer agents were scattered around the room, watching with expressions ranging from boredom to predatory interest. So, Crocodile said, his voice a low, gravelly drawl that seemed to absorb the sound in the room. You are the big spenders who want a hostile takeover. You have my attention. For the moment. Sanji, ever the performer, gave a slight bow. My associate is a man of blunt ambitions. What we mean to say, Mr. Zero, is that we are men of talent and taste who are looking to align ourselves with an organization of equal caliber. Your reputation precedes you. Crocodile's eyes, cold and hooded like a reptile's, shifted to Zoro, who was radiating an aura of barely contained violence. And you? The swordsman. What is your talent? Zoro's hand rested on Wado Ikemonji's hilt. I cut things. The simplicity of the answer, delivered with such absolute conviction, caused a flicker of something, perhaps amusement, in Crocodile's dead eyes. He gestured with his cigar. Mr. One. Test him. Mr. One, Das Bonez, stepped forward, a grim smile on his face. His arms shimmered, morphing into long, brutally sharp blades of pure steel. It's been a while since I've had a good warm-up. Zoro's grin was feral. Finally. He drew his swords, and the room, which had been a stage for posturing, instantly became a killing floor. The two men were a blur of motion, the scream of steel on steel echoing off the gilded walls. Zoro was a whirlwind of his three-sword style, ferocious and untamed. Das Bonez was his opposite, economical, precise, his entire body a weapon. He parried Zoro's onigiri with his bladed forearms, the impact sending sparks flying. He's good, Sanji murmured, his eyes narrowed, analyzing the fight. But Zoro's just getting started. Crocodile watched, his expression unchanged. He was not judging the fight's outcome, he was judging its nature. He was evaluating their potential as assets or threats. As Zoro and Das Bonez fought, the ground floor of the casino erupted into chaos. A group of Marines, led by Captain Smoker, stormed the building. They had tracked the Straw Hats here, following the trail of havoc. We have them now. Tashigi, Smoker's second-in-command, yelled, pointing toward the elevators. But they weren't the only ones who had been led there. Vivi, following Nami's revised instructions delivered by a fast-moving Usopp, arrived moments later. And with her, was Luffy. He didn't make a grand entrance. He simply walked into the opulent, panicked lobby, his eyes scanning the area. The plan had been for him to continue his guerrilla campaign, but Nami, monitoring the situation through Usopp's reports, had made a new calculation. Crocodile was aware of the sabotage. He was trying to draw them out. And Smoker's arrival had turned the casino into a powder keg. It was time to accelerate the timeline. It was time to let the fox off the leash. Vivi, get to the others. I'll handle this, Luffy said, pushing his straw hat down firmly. He saw Smoker, his lower half already a swirling vortex of smoke, heading for the upper floors. Not so fast, Smokey. Luffy called out. Smoker turned, his eyes widening in fury. Straw Hat. You're not getting away this time. He shot toward Luffy, his seastone-tipped jutty ready. Luffy just grinned. Who said I was running? He clapped his hands together, and the entire lobby was plunged into a dizzying illusion. The marble floor seemed to turn into a swirling vortex of water, pulling people down. The chandeliers stretched and warped into monstrous, leering faces. The Marines cried out in confusion, stumbling into each other, their disciplined formations breaking apart. Luffy, immune to his own trickery, simply walked through the chaos, heading for the stairs. Smoker, enraged by the same frustrating tactics from Logue Town, tried to pursue, but he was constantly hampered by his own men, who were flailing at phantom sea monsters. Upstairs, the duel between Zoro and Das Bonez reached a crescendo. With a mighty roar, Zoro unleashed his Shirshir Sun, a draw-and resheath attack so fast it seemed he hadn't moved. A thin red line appeared on Das Bonez's steel chest. He stood frozen for a second, then collapsed, defeated. Silence. The officer agent stared, stunned. Crocodile finally allowed himself a thin, cruel smile. Impressive. You have proven your worth. He stood up, towering over everyone in the room. Welcome to Baroque. The doors to the lounge burst open. Vivi ran in, followed by a panting Usopp. Zoro. Sanji. It's a trap. At the same time, Luffy phased through the wall behind Crocodile's couch, the illusion of solid plaster shimmering and dissipating around him. Hey, are you the Crocodile guy? He asked cheerfully. Crocodile turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Luffy. He took in the straw hat, the simple clothes, and the two ethereal tails of blue flame that had just flickered into existence behind him. He felt the chaotic energy, the source of all his recent frustrations, concentrated in this one smiling boy. So, Crocodile drawled, the ghost has a face. He didn't wait for an answer. His right hand shot out, transforming into a swirling vortex of sand. Desert Spada. A blade of compressed sand shot across the room, aimed directly at Luffy's heart. Luffy, still grinning, simply sidestepped it. The sand blade flew past him and sliced the far wall in two. Whoa! That was close. Luffy, be careful. Vivi screamed. You can't touch him. His body is made of sand. Luffy blinked. Sand. Like at the beach? He cocked his head, then charged, his fist pulled back. Let's see. He threw a punch. His fist passed straight through Crocodile's chest as if it were made of smoke, all momentum lost. Luffy stared at his hand. Then back at Crocodile's smirking face. Crocodile chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. You pirates are all the same. All mindless muscle. He reformed his torso, then thrust his golden hook forward. Luffy, off balance and surprised, couldn't dodge in time. The hook sank deep into his shoulder. Luffy cried out, a genuine sound of pain and shock. Crocodile twisted the hook and threw him across the room. Luffy crashed into a marble column, which cracked under the impact. He slid to the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his grin finally gone, replaced by a look of pained confusion. My power is the Suna Suna no Mi, Crocodile explained, savoring the moment. I am an element. A force of nature. Your parlor tricks and brute force are meaningless against the desert itself. His gaze swept over the assembled pirates, a predator surveying his trapped prey. Miss All Sunday, spring the trap. Nico Robin, who had been watching silently, smiled. As you wish. Suddenly, the windows slammed shut, reinforced steel shutters descending. The door locked with a heavy thud. And from the floor, a cage made of sea stone, the one material that could nullify devil fruit powers, erupted, trapping all of them. Luffy, weakened by the cage's proximity and his injury, felt his fiery tails flicker and die. His strength drained away, leaving him feeling heavy and sluggish. Welcome to my casino, Crocodile sneered. The house always wins. He then did something that froze the blood in Vivi's veins. He revealed his master plan. The rebellion was a feint. His true goal was to find the poneglyph hidden beneath the palace, which held the location of Pluton, one of the three ancient weapons capable of mass destruction. He wasn't just trying to steal a kingdom, he was trying to steal the power to hold the entire world hostage. The clock is ticking, he said, pointing to a massive, ornate clock on the wall. In 1 hour, my agent in the capital will fire a cannonball into the palace square. A cannonball filled with enough explosives to obliterate everyone in a 5-mile radius. The rebels and the royal army will be wiped out in a single stroke. I will be hailed as the hero who stopped the war, and in the chaos, I will claim my prize. He looked at Vivi, his smile widening. And you will all have front-row seats to your country's demise. He turned and left, his laughter echoing in the sealed room. The remaining Baroque Works agents followed, leaving the Straw Hats trapped, defeated, and facing a countdown to genocide. Defeat was a bitter, unfamiliar taste for Luffy. He sat slumped against the seastone bars, his shoulder throbbing, his power utterly gone. The illusions, the foxfire, the shape-shifting, all of it was locked away, suppressed by the mystical stone. He was just a boy again, and he had failed. He had walked into the enemy's lair, arrogant and overconfident, and had been completely and utterly dismantled. "This is my fault," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual bravado. "I thought I could just play with him." Nami's voice, crisp and angry, crackled to life from a tiny den mushy that Usopp had been hiding. "Don't you dare, Luffy. This isn't the time for self-pity. Did you get the information?" Nami was miles away, coordinating from a hidden command post near the coast, but her presence was a palpable force. "He's after an ancient weapon." "Pluton," Vivi stammered, relaying the horrifying truth. "And there's a bomb in Alyabarna." "I heard," Nami's voice was grim. "The stakes just went up. Now, get out of there." "Sanji." "Right here, Nami Swan." Sanji called out from outside the cage. In the initial chaos, he had cleverly positioned himself out of the trap's range. He had been a sleeper agent among them. "Mr. Prince is on his way," Sanji said, a confident smirk in his voice. "Just hold on." He had already initiated his own counterplan, contacting a certain transspecies martial artist who owed him a favor. While they waited, the reality of their failure pressed in. Zoro was testing the bars, his swords making no scratch. On the sea stone, Usopp was curled in a ball of despair. Vivi was staring at the clock, each tick a hammer blow to her heart. Luffy looked at his own hands. The Kitsune fruit wasn't just a power. It was a partner. An ancient, cunning spirit. And he had let it down. He had relied on its tricks but forgotten its wisdom. The Kitsune was a survivor. It didn't fight battles it couldn't win. It adapted. It learned. Crocodile wasn't just a man, he was an embodiment of the desert, arrogant and absolute. To fight him, Luffy couldn't just be a trickster. He had to become his opposite. The rescue came in the form of a giant banana gator, Bananawani, which smashed through the floor, allowing them to escape into the casino's waterway system. They surfaced outside, into the scorching desert sun, with precious minutes left on the clock. "We have to split up," Vivi cried. "We have to stop the bomb and the rebellion." Nami's voice came over the den mushy, her strategic mind already processing the new variables. "Agreed. Vivi, Zoro, Usopp, get to Alyabarna and find that bomb. It's the top priority. Sanji, intercept the Baroque Works leadership before they can interfere. I'll guide you. Chopper, with me. We're going to provide support. Luffy." There was a pause. Everyone looked at him. He was standing, his wound hastily bandaged, his face set like stone. "You know what you have to do," Nami finished, her voice soft but certain. "Yeah," Luffy said. He looked toward Rain Base, toward the man who had humiliated him. "I'm going back." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and ran, a red blur against the white sand, heading back into the lion's den. The second confrontation was different. Luffy found Crocodile in the royal tombs beneath the palace, standing before the massive, unreadable poneglyph. The warlord wasn't surprised to see him. "You're a persistent insect," Crocodile said, not even bothering to turn around. "Did you bring a new trick?" "Yeah," Luffy said. He was carrying a huge barrel of water on his back, something he'd snatched from the palace kitchens. "This one." He kicked the barrel, sending it flying. It burst in midair, dousing Crocodile in water. The warlord hissed, his sand body clumping, becoming solid and heavy. "Water," Crocodile grunted, shaking his arm to get the moisture off. "A clever, if primitive, solution. But you've wasted your only weapon." "Who said it was my only one?" Luffy replied. He charged, his fists wet. This time, his punches landed. They hit with the solid, satisfying thud of flesh on flesh. He was faster, more focused, his rage honed to a fine point. He landed a flurry of blows, driving the warlord back. For a moment, it seemed to be working. But Crocodile was a warlord for a reason. He was a master of his fruit, a veteran of countless battles. With a roar, he used his right hand to touch the ground. Ground Secco. The ability sucked all the moisture from the immediate area. The water on Luffy's fists evaporated. The very air became bone-dry. Crocodile's body returned to its untouchable, granular state. "My power is mastery over sand," he declared. "And what is sand but earth without water? I can create a world where your weapon doesn't exist." He then stabbed his golden hook into the ground. Sables. A massive, swirling sandstorm erupted inside the cavern, blinding Luffy, cutting him with 1,000 tiny grains. Luffy was tossed about like a leaf in a hurricane. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe. Crocodile appeared out of the storm, a phantom of sand and fury, and drove his hook deep into Luffy's stomach, lifting him off the ground. "This is the difference between us," Crocodile whispered, his voice full of contempt. "I am a king. You are a fool who got lucky with a powerful fruit." He flung Luffy into a stone sarcophagus and brought his hand down, draining every last drop of moisture from Luffy's body. Luffy screamed, a raw, agonized sound, as his body shriveled, mummified, until he was little more than a husk. Crocodile looked down at the seemingly dead pirate, then turned back to the poneglyph. "Now, where were we, Miss All Sunday?" Nico Robin stepped out of the shadows, her face impassive. But as she looked at Luffy's desiccated form, a flicker of something, memory, perhaps, or pity, crossed her face. After Crocodile left the tomb, she knelt and let a single drop of water fall from the flask at her belt onto Luffy's lips. A small, rebellious act. It was just enough. The water revived him, his devil fruit's strange biology slowly restoring his form. He crawled out of the tomb, defeated, broken, and utterly humiliated. He had failed. Twice. As he lay in the sand outside, watching the distant battle rage in Alyabarna where his friends were fighting for their lives, something inside him shifted. The anger was gone. The frustration was gone. All that was left was a cold, clear understanding. He had been trying to beat the desert. He had been trying to overpower it. But you don't fight the desert. You don't fight a force of nature. You become its opposite. The Kitsune spirit within him, ancient and wise, whispered a new truth. Fire and water were temporary solutions. But what happens when you apply immense heat to sand? It doesn't just burn. It changes. It transforms. He stood up, his body aching, his will reforged in the furnace of his failure. His two fiery tails ignited, but this time, the blue flames burned with a fierce, white-hot intensity. He began to walk back toward the capital, his every step full of a new, terrible purpose. The final battle took place in the collapsing heart of the city. While the others had managed to stop the bomb and expose Crocodile's treachery, the warlord himself was still an unstoppable force. Luffy, his blood now fueling his rage and power, confronted him for the third and final time. "You just don't know when to die," Crocodile snarled, unleashing another sandstorm. But this time, Luffy didn't try to fight it. He stood his ground, his arms crossed, and let the storm wash over him. His blood, still leaking from his wounds, coated his arms and fists, acting as a liquid medium that allowed him to touch the Sandman. But he wasn't just punching anymore. He held out his hand, and a sphere of the intensely hot, white-blue Kitsune formed in his palm. "You like sand so much?" Luffy growled, his voice raw. "Let's see how you like glass." He slammed the fiery sphere into Crocodile's chest. It wasn't an explosion. It was a chemical reaction. The superheated energy melted the sand on contact, turning it into a sheet of molten, glowing glass. Crocodile cried out, a sound of pure shock and agony, as part of his own body became a brittle prison. The fight transformed. It was no longer a brawl, it was a maelstrom of sand and searing blue flame. Luffy, bleeding and half dead, fought with the cunning of a cornered god. He used illusions not to trick, but to herd, forcing Crocodile into positions where he could apply his transformative heat. He turned the ground to glass to trap Crocodile's feet. He fired bolts of foxfire that vitrified the sand blades in mid-air, shattering them into dust. Finally, bleeding from a dozen wounds, Luffy drove his fist upward, through Crocodile's defenses, aiming for the sky. Gomu Gomu no Storm, he roared, combining the name of his old, simple power with the new, terrifying one. A massive, spiraling pillar of his own blood, superheated by the Kitsune, shot up through the crumbling cavern ceiling, piercing the bedrock and flying into the sky above Alabasta. The sheer force of the blow shattered Crocodile's sand form, encasing him in a jagged, instantly cooled prison of his own element, glass. He was defeated, sealed within a monument to his own arrogance. The pillar of bloody steam hit the upper atmosphere, which, thanks to the lingering effects of the dance powder, was saturated with moisture. It seeded the clouds. And it began to rain. As the first drops fell on the parched land, the fighting stopped. Soldiers from both sides looked up, tears mixing with the blessed water on their faces. The war was over. Luffy collapsed, his body finally giving out. As he lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, he felt a powerful, resonant surge from within. It was the Kitsune, acknowledging his victory. A victory not of power, but of adaptation. Of wisdom. In the haze of his exhaustion, a third fiery tail flickered into brilliant, undeniable life behind him. His victory was short-lived. A shadow fell over him. A tall, gaunt man in a vice-admiral's coat stood there, his presence an oppressive void. It was Onimaru. His pale gray eyes glowed with a predatory light. "The fox has killed the crocodile," Onimaru rasped, his voice devoid of emotion. "The world government thanks you for your service." His hand, transforming into the gnarled, spectral claw of the Okuri Inu, reached for Luffy's throat. Now, the hunt is over. A blur of black and gold. Zoro and Sanji, battered but standing, appeared between them. "You're not touching him," Zoro snarled, his swords drawn. Onimaru didn't even look at them. His power was a force of pure physical negation, a conceptual weight that pressed down on them. They were outmatched, and they knew it. But then, another presence. Nico Robin stood beside Luffy, her arms crossed, a dozen more arms sprouting from the ground around Onimaru, holding him fast. "I don't think so," she said, her voice cold. "He interests me. I will not let you take him." Onimaru was momentarily shocked by the betrayal of the woman he had been sent to ostensibly protect. The demon of O'Hara was siding with pirates. The standoff was broken by the roar of the Kung Fu dugongs, who had arrived with the Mary. The Straw Hats scrambled, grabbing their unconscious captain and their new, unexpected ally, and made a desperate, humiliating retreat. They fled Alabasta, leaving behind a celebrating kingdom, but with the terrifying, first-hand knowledge of the true enemy that now hunted them. An enemy that couldn't be tricked or punched. An enemy that represented the cold, absolute order of the world. From the bridge of his ship, High Admiral Kageyama received Onimaru's report. Objective failed. The Kitsune is stronger than anticipated. It has allied with the demon of O'Hara. Kageyama was not angered. He was galvanized. This was no longer a simple anomaly. It was a burgeoning nexus of chaos, drawing other destabilizing elements to it. He stood up, his imposing figure casting a long shadow in the sterile room. "The fox has 3 tails, and now shelters a demon," he mused to himself. The situation required a proportional response. Authorize the Azura Protocol. The war for a kingdom was over. The war for the world was just beginning. Chapter 5, Whispers from the Sky, Judgment from the sea between Alabasta and... Their next unknown destination was unnervingly quiet. The triumphant cheers from the liberated kingdom had long since faded, replaced by a heavy, simmering tension that clung to the going merry like a wet fog. They had won. They had saved a country, defeated a warlord, and Luffy's bounty poster, delivered by a news coup, had skyrocketed to a staggering 300 million berries. But it felt like a hollow victory. The brief, violent encounter with Vice Admiral Onimaro had left a deeper wound than any of Crocodile's attacks. It was a scar on their confidence. Zoro, who had faced the Vice Admiral head-on for a few desperate seconds, was grim and silent, spending his days lifting gargantuan, makeshift weights with a terrifying intensity. Sanji's usual flirtations were muted, his focus entirely on creating nutrient-rich meals designed for recovery and strength. They had felt Onimaru's power, a cold, absolute negation that seemed to mock their own hard-won strength. It wasn't a power you could overcome with spirit, it was a fundamental law of the world, and they were on the wrong side of it. Luffy sat on his favorite spot, the sheep figurehead of the Mary, his legs dangling over the water. His third tail, a new and vibrant addition to his supernatural appendages, flickered with a nervous energy, its blue light reflecting in the waves. The wounds from Crocodile had mostly healed, his rubbery yet not rubbery constitution patching itself up with unnatural speed. But the memory of Onimaru's presence, the feeling of being prey, lingered. For the first time, he understood that there were enemies his power couldn't simply overwhelm or outwit. There were hunters in this world, and he was their quarry. The crew's newest member, Nico Robin, was an enigma wrapped in calm smiles and dark observations. She moved about the ship with a quiet grace, offering help that wasn't asked for, her knowledge of the world both encyclopedic and unsettling. She had saved Luffy, yet her motives were as murky as the deep sea. Nami found her in the ship's small galley, poring over a stack of books she had somehow managed to bring with her from Alabasta. The bounty posters were spread out on the table. Luffy's, Zoro's, and now, a new one for her. Pirate Queen Nami. 80 million berries. The title, once a half-serious joke from Luffy, was now official, printed in bold letters by the world government. It should have been a thrill. It felt like a target. Find anything? Nami asked, leaning against the doorframe. Robin looked up, her dark eyes unreadable. Your new first mate has attracted some very powerful attention, she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. She tapped a book bound in dark leather. It was a historical text on the hierarchy of the Marines. High Admiral Kageyama. They call him, the Immovable Justice. He's the commander of the world government's most elite and secretive unit, the Divine Enforcers. Divine Enforcers? Nami repeated, the name sending a chill down her spine. That's what Onimaru was. He was one of them, Robin confirmed. They are a unit comprised entirely of mythical and incredibly rare Zoan users, handpicked by Kageyama himself. Their mandate is not to capture pirates, it is to purge threats to the world's balance. Deities, demons, and rogue legends. That is how they see your captain. She paused, her gaze steady. And by extension, you. Nami's stomach tightened. This wasn't about piracy. This was about ideology. They hadn't just made an enemy of the Marines, they had made an enemy of the world's self-proclaimed guardians of reality. Why are you telling me this? Why did you help us? Robin closed the book softly. Crocodile sought an ancient weapon to destroy the world. You sought to save it. For now, our interests align. She offered a small, enigmatic smile. And besides, I have never seen a Kitsune serve a human queen. It is a fascinating deviation from the old legends. I wish to see where this story goes. Before Nami could press her, a commotion from the deck drew their attention. A massive shadow had fallen over the Mary. A colossal galleon, looking like it had fallen from the sky and been crudely patched back together, was drifting nearby. Strange, garishly dressed men were laughing and jeering from its deck. They had drifted into the waters near the island of Jaya, a lawless haven for the worst scum of the Grand Line. The ship belonged to the Bellamy pirates. Look what we have here, a voice sneered from the other ship. It was Bellamy, the hyena, himself, a tall man with a smug, punchable face. He lounged on his railing, looking down at them with utter contempt. A tiny little boat with a big, stupid bounty. 300 million for that idiot in the straw hat. The age of dreams is truly dead if that's what pirates are worth now. His crew roared with laughter. They were modern pirates, believers in a new era of realism and tangible rewards, scornful of old legends like the One Piece or the mythical Sky Island. Usopp, ever brave in the face of mockery, puffed out his chest. You're talking to the future queen of the pirates. Show some respect. Bellamy's eyes landed on Nami, his gaze slimy and dismissive. He looked at her bounty poster, which one of his men was holding up. Pirate Queen Nami, he scoffed, the words dripping with derision. Look at you. You're nothing but a back-alley cat who got lucky. A pretty little navigator hiding behind a monster. A queen. You wouldn't last a day in the New World. The insult was sharp, personal, and it struck a nerve deep inside Nami. It was a voice from her own past, the voice that told her she was nothing more than a thief and a survivor, playing dress-up with titles she hadn't earned. She flinched, her confidence wavering. But the air on the Mary's deck had gone ice-cold. Luffy, who had been watching from the figurehead, hadn't moved. But the playful light in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a flat, terrifying emptiness. His three tails, which had been flickering nervously, now hung perfectly still, the blue flames burning with a low, menacing hum. What did you just say? Luffy's voice was quiet, but it cut through the jeers like a shard of glass. Bellamy smirked, enjoying the reaction. I said your little queen is a joke. This is a man's world, Straw Hat. Dreams are for fools, and women are for keeping the ship clean. Luffy was gone from the figurehead. He didn't jump. He didn't move. He was just, suddenly standing on the railing of Bellamy's ship, a dozen yards away, having crossed the distance in the space of a heartbeat. The Bellamy pirates stumbled back, their laughter dying in their throats. Luffy, no. He's not worth it. Nami cried out, but her voice was distant. Luffy ignored her. He looked at Bellamy, his head tilted slightly, his expression devoid of all emotion. You think dreams are foolish? He asked, his voice still unervingly calm. You think strength is the only thing that's real? Damn right I do, Bellamy spat, trying to regain his bravado, though a tremor of fear was now visible in his hands. He activated his power, the spring fruit, his legs compressing like coils. And I'll show you what real power looks like. He launched himself at Luffy, intending to smash him with his signature, spring hopper, attack. Luffy didn't move a muscle. He just raised one hand. Fine, he whispered. Let me show you something real. He tapped Bellamy's forehead with his index finger. The world vanished. For Bellamy, one moment he was a missile of compressed steel and muscle, flying through the air. The next, he was somewhere else. It was cold. And dark. And wet. He was at the bottom of the ocean. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight that felt like the entire world was squeezing the air from his lungs, compressing his bones into dust. He couldn't breathe. His eyes bulged, his heart hammered against his ribs in a frantic, useless rhythm. Panic, stark and primal, consumed him. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a vision. His body was screaming at him that this was real. He could feel the crushing, bone-deep cold, the salt water burning his throat, the desperate, agonizing need for air. Giant, shadowy shapes with glowing, hateful eyes swirled in the crushing darkness around him, the leviathans of the deep. He was going to die. He was dead. On the deck of the ship, Bellamy had frozen in mid-air, a foot from Luffy's face. His eyes were wide with unseeing terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. He was completely paralyzed, trapped within the hyperrealistic illusion Luffy had crafted just for him. Luffy held him there for a long, silent 10 seconds. An eternity in the crushing abyss of Bellamy's mind. Then, with a flick of his finger, he released him. Bellamy dropped to the deck like a marionette with its strings cut. He landed in a heap, his body convulsing, coughing and sputtering as if he were trying to expel lungs full of salt water. He clawed at his own throat, his eyes darting around wildly, still seeing the phantom leviathans in the shadows of his own ship. He was completely broken, his arrogant swagger shattered by a single touch. Luffy looked down at the whimpering pirate, his expression still cold. "The sea is real," he said, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "So is pressure. And fear. And drowning." He then turned his gaze on the rest of Bellamy's terrified crew. "And so is my queen's dream." He stepped back onto the railing of the Mary as if he had just been for a stroll. The entire port of Mock Town, which had been watching the confrontation, was silent. No one had ever seen anything like it. It wasn't a fight. It was a psychological execution. It was a display of power so absolute and terrifying it defied comprehension. As the Mary sailed away, leaving the traumatized Bellamy pirates in its wake, the mood on the ship was somber. Usopp was pale, staring at Luffy with a new kind of fear. Even Zoro looked unsettled. He respected strength, but this was something else entirely. This was violation. That night, under a sky littered with stars, Nami found Luffy back on the figurehead, his knees drawn up to his chest, staring out at the darkness. His tails were gone, suppressed again, as if he were ashamed of them. She sat down beside him, the silence stretching between them. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft. "He hurt your feelings," Luffy replied, not looking at her. "So I hurt his." "You did more than that, Luffy," she said gently. "You terrified him. You terrified all of us, a little." He finally turned to look at her, and in the starlight, she saw a vulnerability she had never seen before. The mask of the simple-minded boy and the facade of the cold-blooded trickster were both gone. All that was left was him. "The fruit." He started, his voice barely a whisper. "It has a voice. It's old. So old. Most of the time, it's quiet. It just wants to be free, to run, to play tricks. But sometimes, when I get angry, it gets angry too. And it wants to do more than trick." He looked down at his hands. "It wants to hunt. To dominate. To break things. The way I broke him." Nami's heart ached for him. He was still just a boy, burdened with the spirit of an ancient, predatory god. He wasn't just wielding a power, he was wrestling with it. "When you knelt to me in Kokoyashi," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion, "it was the first time the fruit was completely quiet. It felt right. It felt like it had found its purpose. It's a celestial fox, the legends say. They're guardians. Protectors of sacred things." He met her eyes, and his gaze was filled with a raw, desperate honesty. "It wants to protect its den. You're my den, Nami. Your dream is my den. Sometimes, I'm just scared I'll burn it all down trying to keep it safe." In that moment, Nami's fear of him evaporated, replaced by a wave of fierce, protective affection. He wasn't her monster. He was her champion, fighting a battle on two fronts, against the world, and against himself. The crown on her head suddenly felt heavier, but not with fear. With responsibility. His loyalty wasn't a chain, it was a trust she had to be worthy of. She reached out and placed her hand on his. "You won't," she said, her voice full of a conviction she didn't know she had. "Because I won't let you. We're in this together, remember? You're my first mate. My partner. We'll figure it out." Luffy looked at her hand on his, then back at her face, a small, genuine smile finally returning. "Okay, Nami." Their bond, forged in the fires of Arlong Park, was now tempered into something deeper. Not just a promise between a captain and a subordinate, but a pact between two halves of a whole. Their shared moment was interrupted by Robin, who approached them with a strange, star-shaped dial. "Forgive the intrusion. But while you were disciplining Mr. Bellamy, I was gathering information in town. It seems the story of a ship falling from the sky is true. It belonged to an explorer named Montblanc Cricket. He's a descendant of Montblanc Noland, the infamous liar from the fairy tales." Nami's navigator instincts took over immediately. "Noland wasn't a liar," she stated, her eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor. "His logbook detailed precise ocean currents and weather phenomena that were centuries ahead of their time. The story says he found a city of gold on Jaya. But modern sea charts show the island was split in two by a massive explosion or upheaval. What if the city of gold is still there, but in the sky?" The idea was insane. A sky island. But in the grand line, insanity was just another variable to be charted. And more importantly, a city of gold would solve their funding problems for the rest of an entire royal campaign. The dream was tantalizing. But as they prepared to seek out Montblanc Cricket and the legendary knock-up stream that could supposedly launch a ship into the sky, a darker shadow was gathering. In his office, High Admiral Kageyama reviewed the latest report. The Kitsune's energy signature, after being scattered across Alabasta, had reconverged and was now concentrated near Jaya. Nico Robin's presence was confirmed. "Jaya," Kageyama mused. He walked over to a massive, detailed map of the Grand Line. His finger traced a path to the island, then moved upward, into the blank space above it. Of course. The home of the Shondorian Golden City. A place of gods. His own fruit, the Hito no Mi model, Azura, thrummed within him. It was a power of divine, wrathful order. It craved confrontation with other divine beings, especially false ones or chaotic ones. Skypiea, a place of legends and ancient history, a place outside the world government's direct control, was the perfect hunting ground. A place where a god of order could hunt a god of chaos without mortal interference. "He is running to the sky to escape the sea," Kageyama said to the empty room. He pressed a button on his desk. "Dispatch the purifiers. Vice Admirals Kaku and Jayabura. Equip them with the null field projector and full seastone armaments. They are not to engage directly unless necessary. Their mission is to wait at the base of the knock-up stream." His eyes gleamed with a cold, strategic light. "They will test the Kitsune's limits. And when it is weakened, falling from its stolen heaven, it will fall into my hands." He was not just hunting a pirate anymore. He was setting a trap for a god. Chapter 6, The Nine-Tailed God of the Sky. The ascent was an act of pure, terrifying faith. The Going Merry, caught in the explosive torrent of the knock-up stream, was launched into the heavens like a cannonball. The world dissolved into a blur of churning water and screaming wind. They shot past the clouds, into the thin, cold air of the upper atmosphere, a tiny wooden ship trespassing in the domain of gods and birds. Then, silence. They breached the surface of a vast, white sea, a sea made not of water, but of thick, dense clouds. Above them was a second sky, a brilliant, impossible blue. The air was warm, and the light had a strange, golden quality. They had made it. They were in Skypiea, the sea in the sky. The initial wonder was quickly replaced by a series of hostile encounters. They were branded as illegal entrants by the local authorities, a winged, angelic-looking people who were nonetheless rigid and unwelcoming. They were attacked by a masked guerrilla warrior on a strange, cloud-skimming bird. And they learned of the island's ruler, a man who called himself God, a being of immense and terrible power named Enel. "He has the power of lightning," Konis, a kind sky-dweller who had befriended them, explained in a hushed, terrified whisper. "And he can hear everything that happens on this island. He knows our thoughts, our fears. He passes judgment from above. No one can oppose him." This mantra, as the sky people called it, was a perfect tool of oppression. It was a form of observation hockey so advanced it bordered on omniscience, allowing Enel to maintain absolute control through fear. Nami, a strategist who thrived on information, was immediately chilled by the concept of an enemy who could read her every plan before she even spoke it aloud. Luffy, however, was unfazed. A god who doesn't let people live freely, he scoffed, leaning back in a chair in Koniza's house. Doesn't sound much like a god to me. Sounds like a bully. Their status as criminals forced them to become fugitives. They fled to the upper yard, the other half of Jaya, a chunk of their own blue sea world that had been launched into the sky centuries ago. It was a primordial jungle teeming with massive, ancient trees and strange creatures, the legendary city of gold, Shandora, hidden somewhere within its depths. It was also Enel's personal playground, and the battleground for a centuries-old war between the Sky People and the Shandorians, the descendants of the original inhabitants of Jaya. The crew was separated in the ensuing chaos. Nami, Usopp, and Sanji found themselves cornered by Enel's priests, fanatical followers who wielded strange powers called dials. Zoro was lost in the jungle, gleefully seeking a worthy opponent. Robin, true to her nature, had vanished to search for a poneglyph that was rumored to be in Shandora. And Luffy. Luffy was on a collision course with God himself. The first confrontation was on the ruins of a sacrificial altar. Enel appeared before Luffy not with a grand entrance, but with a flicker of static electricity, materializing from thin air. He was a tall, unnaturally lean man with elongated earlobes and a serene, mocking smile. A massive ring of interconnected drums was strapped to his back. "So, you are the blue sea dweller who defies me," Enel said, his voice calm, yet carrying the arrogant authority of one who has never been challenged. His mantra swept over Luffy, reading him. He felt the chaotic energy, the strange, flickering power of the Kitsune. A fascinating power. A pity it is wasted on a monkey. Luffy just grinned, his three fiery tails swishing in agitation. "You're the guy who's been hurting everyone. The fake god." "Fake." Enel's smile tightened. "I am lightning. I am judgment. I am fear. On this island, that makes me God." He tapped one of the drums on his back. "Allow me to demonstrate." Without warning, a massive pillar of raw lightning, thick as a tree trunk, descended from the sky, striking the spot where Luffy stood. The explosion was deafening, the light blinding. The stone altar was vaporized, leaving a crater of molten rock. Enel watched, his expression bored. He expected a pile of ash. Instead, Luffy was standing in the center of the crater, completely unharmed, smoke rising from his shoulders. "Whoa," Luffy said, looking at his smoking vest. That tickled. Enel's serene expression finally cracked. He stared, his advanced mantra screaming at him that what he was seeing was impossible. He had just struck this man with millions of volts of electricity. He should be a charred smear on the ground. Luffy, of course, had no idea why he was immune. He didn't know the Gomu Gomu no Mi was his natural insulator. He just knew the lightning hadn't hurt him. "Is that all you got, God?" he taunted. Enel, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of something other than divine boredom. He felt annoyance. Insolent insect. He vanished in a crackle of static and reappeared directly in front of Luffy, his hand transformed into a spear of pure electricity. Luffy's instincts, honed by the Kitsune spirit, screamed. He threw himself back, but the spear was too fast. It grazed his side, and while the electricity did nothing, the superheated plasma of the lightning bolt left a sizzling, angry burn on his skin. It was the heat, not the voltage, that was the weapon. "So, you are not immune to being burned," Enel noted, a cruel smile returning to his face. "Good to know." The fight began in earnest. It was a battle of two seemingly invincible beings. Enel was untouchable, his body made of pure energy. Luffy was immune to Enel's primary weapon. But Enel's mantra was the true obstacle. Every move Luffy made, every illusion he tried to create, Enel saw it coming. Luffy would conjure a phantom image, and Enel would dispel it with a casual bolt of lightning before it could even fully form. "Your tricks are amusingly primitive," Enel mocked, effortlessly dodging a fiery punch. "I see your intent before you even think it. You cannot lie to a god." Luffy was on the back foot. He was faster, probably stronger in a pure physical sense, but he couldn't land a single solid blow. Every attack was predicted, every feint ignored. He was a brawler fighting a mind reader. And then, it got worse. A low, discordant hum began to emanate from the blue sea, far below. It was a strange, unnatural frequency that resonated deep in Luffy's bones. On the deck of a black marine ship at the base of the Knockup Stream, Vice Admiral Kaku, a man with a long, square nose, flipped a switch on a large, complex device. "Null field projector activated," he reported calmly. "Range, maximum. Frequency set to disrupt mythical zone signatures." High above, in the upper yard, Luffy felt a wave of nausea. His power, which usually flowed like a river, suddenly began to stutter and flicker. An illusion of a giant fox he was trying to manifest dissolved into static. One of his fiery tails sputtered and vanished. He stumbled, a wave of dizziness washing over him. "What's wrong, Blue Sea Dweller?" Enel taunted, noticing the immediate change. "Your power abandoning you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He raised his hand, and a storm of lightning bolts rained down. Luffy, his powers faltering, was forced to dodge frantically. He was no longer a confident trickster, he was just a boy running from a thunderstorm. The Divine Enforcer's device was working perfectly, a long-range surgical strike against his very essence. The battle turned into a rout. Enel, enjoying the sudden shift in power, began to systematically hunt down the rest of the crew. He appeared before Sanji and Usopp, who were on the giant ark, the Maxim, and struck them down with a single, massive bolt. He found Zoro and defeated him in a similar fashion. He located the Shondorian warriors and subjected them to his divine judgment. His voice echoed across the island, a running commentary of his victory, a tool to crush the morale of any who still resisted. Luffy, weakened and desperate, could only listen as the life signatures of his friends winked out one by one in his own developing haki. Nami, who was with him, could only watch in horror. "He's taking them all out," she whispered, her face pale. "We can't win, Luffy. We have to retreat." Luffy was leaning against a giant vine, panting, his remaining two tails burning weakly. He looked at Nami's terrified face. He heard Enel's mocking laughter echoing through the trees. He felt the insidious, weakening field from below. He was being attacked on all fronts, physically, mentally, and spiritually. He was cornered. And in that moment of absolute desperation, the Kitsune spirit within him did not cower. It awakened. It was not a whisper this time. It was a roar. An ancient, primal consciousness that had slumbered for centuries, awakened by the threat of its host's demise and the insult of a false god's hubris. It was a celestial being, a creature not of the earth or the sea, but of the very fabric of reality. It did not see the world in terms of matter and energy. It saw it in terms of spirit, of will, of belief. Luffy's eyes, usually so round and simple, sharpened. The pupils elongated, becoming slitted, like a fox's. The blue of his fiery tails deepened, becoming the color of the twilight sky. He pushed himself off the vine, standing tall. The debilitating effect of the null field projector lessened, not because the field was weaker, but because he was now drawing on a source of power it couldn't touch. "Nami," he said, his voice a strange harmony of his own and something ancient and powerful. "Get to the ark. Get everyone on it. I'll handle him." Enel appeared before them, drawn by the sudden, massive spike in Luffy's power. "Still defiant? I grow tired of this game." He raised his arm, preparing to unleash his ultimate attack, the Rago, a massive, spherical thundercloud capable of obliterating an entire island. You are not a god, Luffy stated, his new, dual-toned voice resonating with power. You are just a man with a strong devil fruit. You see thoughts. You see actions. But you don't see the truth. And what is the truth, monkey? Enel sneered. Luffy smiled, a true Kitsune smile, full of ancient cunning and cosmic mischief. That everything has a spirit. And spirits can be tricked. He didn't create an illusion. He did something far more profound. He reached out with his awakened senses and spoke to the spirit of the lightning itself. He didn't command it. He persuaded it. He presented it with a reality more enticing than Enel's command, the reality of chaos, of freedom, of burning not in a straight, predictable line, but in a wild, beautiful, unpredictable dance. Enel unleashed a torrent of lightning. But instead of striking Luffy, the bolts veered off at the last second, twisting into beautiful, intricate patterns in the air, forming spiraling dragons of pure electricity that danced harmlessly around him. The lightning was no longer obeying its master. It was playing. Enel stared, his jaw slack, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. His mantra screamed at him that Luffy was standing still, yet the lightning refused to hit him. His absolute control was broken. My power. He stammered. It was never yours, Luffy replied. He held out his hand, and a ball of the dancing lightning settled into his palm, purring like a kitten. He then closed his fist, and his own blue Kitsune consumed it, feeding on it. He was not just immune to Enel's power anymore. He was devouring it. Enel, for the first time in his life, felt fear. True, mortal fear. He reacted instinctively, transforming his entire body into a colossal being of pure lightning, his 200 million volt Amaru form. It was his final, most powerful transformation. Luffy met it with his own. He didn't need to change his shape. He simply unleashed the power that was roaring within him. A torrent of pure, celestial energy erupted from his back. His tails, which had been flickering between 2 and 3, exploded in number. 4. 5. 6. They blazed into existence in a flash of deep indigo light, each one a banner of his divine awakening. He didn't just have 6 tails, he was the six-tailed fox. His form blurred, becoming a semi-ethereal silhouette of a colossal Kitsune made of pure blue and white energy, the boy within it just a burning core of will. He was no longer a pirate fighting a god. He was a god of chaos confronting a god of order. The clash was not of punches and lightning bolts. It was a battle of concepts. Enel threw spears of divine judgment. Luffy's illusions became so potent they manifested as physical shields of cherry blossom petals, catching the spears and turning them into flowers. Enel tried to read Luffy's mind, but found only a swirling cosmos of trickster thoughts, a labyrinth of impossible geometries that threatened to shatter his own sanity. Finally, Luffy brought his hands together, the 6 tails behind him coiling like springs. He gathered the stolen lightning, his own celestial foxfire, and the very will of the island itself into a single, blindingly brilliant sphere of spiraling energy. It was a vortex of chaos and creation. This is for my crew, he roared, his voice the sound of 1,000 whispering foxes. Golden fox fire, 9 sins incineration. He didn't throw it. He became it. He shot forward, a meteor of divine retribution, and plunged directly through Enel's giant lightning form. The world went white. There was no sound, only a profound sense of reality being unwritten and then rewritten. When the light faded, Enel was gone. Not dead, but displaced, his lightning form forcibly discharged and shunted into the circuitry of his own golden arc, the Maxim. The arc, overloaded with his essence, shot off into the sky, heading for the moon he had always dreamed of, a god exiled to his own empty heaven. Luffy, his 6 tails receding back to a stable 3, landed softly on the ground, breathing heavily. He had won. Below, on the blue sea, the null field projector exploded. Kaku and Jayabura were thrown back, their faces covered in soot. The sheer backlash of divine energy from Luffy's final attack had overloaded their device, feeding back down the beam and turning their weapon into a bomb. Report. Jayabura snarled, getting to his feet. What happened? Kaku stared at the smoking wreckage of the projector, his face grim. The target's energy output exceeded all theoretical limits. It fought back. Their mission was a catastrophic failure. They had not tested the Kitsune. They had provoked it. On Skypiea, the victory was absolute. Luffy, guided by Nami, found the legendary golden bell of Shandora and rang it, a promise fulfilled across centuries. The sound echoed down to the blue sea, reaching the ears of Mont Blanc Cricket, proof that his ancestor was not a liar. As the Going Merry prepared for its descent, a last-minute gift from the Sky People packed in its hold, a sense of weary triumph settled over the crew. They were battered, bruised, but alive. And they were rich. Nami calculated the value of the gold they had salvaged, her eyes sparkling with a truly regal light. This single haul would fund their entire campaign, and then some. The descent was more controlled than the ascent, using a giant, octopus-shaped balloon. As they floated down through the white sea, passing back into the blue sky of their own world, they saw the black marine ship waiting for them. It was damaged, smoke still rising from its deck, but it was there. They're waiting for us. Usopp shrieked. But Luffy, standing at the figurehead, just smiled. He was tired, but the celestial power still hummed beneath his skin. He looked down at the ship, a god looking down at mortals. The divine enforcers fired. Not a cannonball, but a massive net, woven from thick ropes of sea stone, designed to fall over the Merry and drag it from the sky, neutralizing Luffy in the process. Luffy didn't even move. He simply took a breath and let it out. It wasn't a roar or a shout. It was a wave of pure, condensed spiritual pressure, a whisper of the power he had just unleashed. A conqueror's haki so potent it was a physical force. The wave of will washed over the net. The sea stone, which nullified devil fruit powers, had no defense against pure spirit. The ropes didn't just break, they disintegrated, turning to dust in midair. The wave continued, slamming into the marine vessel. The ship didn't explode. It was simply pushed. The force sent it reeling back, its crew thrown from their feet, its momentum utterly broken. The Merry floated past them, descending gently into the sea, leaving the stunned and defeated divine enforcers in its wake. They had come to trap a fox and had been swatted aside like a fly by a dragon. The world had just been given a glimpse of Luffy's true power. And High Admiral Kageyama, listening to the terrified, incoherent report from his elite agents, finally understood. This was not an enemy to be hunted. This was a rival deity to be challenged. And he, the Azura, would be the one to do it. Chapter 7, The Queen's Decree and the Aqua Laguna. The City of Water 7 was a symphony of sound and motion. The rhythmic clang of hammers on steel, the hiss of steam from 100 workshops, the cheerful shouts of shipwrights, and the gentle, constant lapping of canals against stone walkways. It was a city built on water, a marvel of engineering and artistry, the home of the world's greatest shipbuilders. For Nami, it was a sanctuary, a place of hope. For the Going Merry, it was a hospice. The little caravel had been a valiant soldier. It had carried them through storms, across deserts, and into the sky itself. But the journey had taken its toll. The brutal launch of the knock-up stream and the uncontrolled descent had fractured its keel. The ship was dying. They had come to Water 7 with a fortune in gold, seeking repairs from the legendary shipwright Iceberg, the city's beloved mayor and the president of the Galila Company. The diagnosis, delivered by the expert foreman of Dock 1, was grim and absolute. The keel is shattered beyond repair, Polly, the ropan mast specialist, had declared, his face serious. You can patch the hull, you can replace the mast, but a broken keel means the soul of the ship is broken. This vessel will never sail safely again. It'll break apart in the next serious storm. The news. fell like a lead weight in the festive city. The crew gathered in the dilapidated inn where they were staying, the heavy satchels of gold feeling more like anchors than treasure. For most of them, it was a sad but practical reality. For Usopp, it was a betrayal. He sat across from Nami at a rickety wooden table, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. Luffy was there, sitting beside Nami, his expression unusually serious. The other crew members stood back, sensing the impending storm. "We're not abandoning the Mary," Usopp said, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and defiance. "We can fix her. We have to fix her. She's one of us. She's part of the crew." Nami's heart ached for him. The Mary was a gift from Kaya, from their home village. It was a living piece of Usopp's past, his link to the life he'd left behind. She, more than anyone, understood that attachment. The Mary was the first ship of her new kingdom, a gift from her own reclaimed home. Letting it go felt like cutting off a part of herself. But a queen could not let sentiment cloud her judgment. "Usopp, listen to me," she said, her voice gentle but firm, the voice of a commander, not just a friend. "The greatest shipwrights in the world have condemned her. Taking her back to sea would be suicide. It would be an insult to her memory, to let her fall apart in the middle of the ocean. She deserves to rest." "Rest? You talk about her like she's just a tool." Usopp shot back, his voice rising. He pointed a trembling finger at Nami. "This is what it's about, isn't it? The Queen. You're getting a big, new, fancy ship for your royal fleet. The old one isn't good enough anymore. Is that it? Are you just going to discard loyal followers when they're no longer useful?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. It was a direct challenge to her leadership, to her character. Sanji took a threatening step forward, a low growl in his throat, but Zoro put a hand on his chest, stopping him. This was not their fight to win. Nami's expression hardened. The gentle friend receded, replaced by the cool, resolute monarch. "This has nothing to do with useful. This is about the safety of this crew. My crew. As your captain, you're not my captain." Usopp screamed, shoving his chair back as he shot to his feet. "Luffy is my captain. And Luffy would never abandon a friend." All eyes turned to Luffy. He hadn't moved. His three tails, which had been resting calmly on the floor, now began to stir, the blue flames intensifying slightly. He looked at Usopp, his gaze steady, and for a moment, the old, simple Luffy was there. But then he glanced at Nami, saw the pain and resolve in her eyes, and his expression became unreadable. He had made a promise. He was her first mate. Her will was his. "Nami's right, Usopp," Luffy said, his voice quiet but final. "She made the decision. We're getting a new ship." The word struck Usopp like a physical blow. It was the ultimate betrayal. He stared at Luffy, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt. "You too, Luffy? After everything, you're siding with her?" "This isn't about sides," Luffy said, his voice hardening. "It's about the crew's future. Nami is the one who charts that future. I'm the one who makes sure we get there." It was too much for Usopp. His grief and fear curdled into a desperate, furious rage. "Fine," he snarled, his face a mess of tears and fury. "If you're all going to abandon the Mary, then I'm leaving the crew. And I'm taking her with me. I challenge you, Luffy. For the ownership of the Going Mary. A duel." Silence. The declaration was an earthquake, shattering the very foundation of their crew. A duel between crewmates was unthinkable, a sacred bond broken. Luffy stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The temperature in the room dropped. The blue flames of his tails flared, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The ancient, predatory spirit within him stirred, awakened by the challenge, by the threat to its den's unity. "You don't want to do this, Usopp," Luffy said, his voice a low, dangerous warning. I do. Usopp insisted, his fear eclipsed by his righteous indignation. Tonight, at midnight, on the coast. If I win, the Mary is mine. He turned and stormed out of the inn, leaving a chasm of shock and sorrow in his wake. Nami put her head in her hands, a wave of nausea washing over her. This was her fault. Her decision. Her first act as a true, decisive queen had fractured her kingdom. That night, on the storm-swept coast where the decommissioned ships were left to be consumed by the sea, the duel took place. The Aqua Laguna, Water 7's annual high tide of monstrous proportions, was forecast to hit before dawn, adding a grim sense of urgency to the confrontation. Usopp was waiting, his slingshot in hand, his face a mask of grim determination. He had spent the hours since his declaration preparing, turning the shoreline into a minefield of his clever, deceptive traps. He knew he couldn't win a straight fight. His only chance was to outwit, to trick, to use his own brand of chaos against Luffy's. Luffy arrived alone. He walked onto the beach, the wind whipping his red vest, his straw hat pulled low. He wasn't radiating power. His tails were gone. He looked like the boy Usopp had first met in Syrup Village. Luffy. I'm not going to back down, Usopp said, his voice tight. I know, Luffy replied. The fight began. Usopp unleashed his arsenal. Exploding stars that filled the air with smoke and shrapnel. Caltros that littered the ground. He used impact dials he'd acquired in Skypiea, absorbing the force of the waves and redirecting it. He was brilliant, desperate, and surprisingly effective. He managed to land several hits, using deceit and misdirection to catch Luffy off guard. But Luffy wasn't truly fighting back. He was dodging, enduring, his movements sluggish, his heart clearly not in it. He was pulling his punches, holding back his immense power. This wasn't a battle, it was a painful, drawn-out argument expressed through violence. Fight me, Luffy. Usopp screamed, firing a flame star that Luffy easily sidestepped. Take me seriously. I am a warrior of the sea. Luffy stopped. He looked at his friend, at the desperate, proud, terrified man who was willing to destroy their bond for the sake of a memory. He saw the pain, the grief, the fear of being left behind. Punching him into submission wouldn't solve anything. It would just break him further. Luffy closed his eyes. The Kitsune spirit within him offered a different path. Not destruction. Not deception. Empathy. Forced, absolute, heartbreaking empathy. Okay, Usopp, Luffy whispered. You want me to take you seriously? I will. He moved. He wasn't fast. He just flowed across the beach, a ghost in the moonlight. He dodged every trap, sidestepped every projectile, his movements fluid and certain. He appeared in front of Usopp before the sniper could even raise his slingshot. He didn't throw a punch. He simply placed his hand gently on Usopp's forehead. The world dissolved. Usopp was no longer on the beach. He was on the deck of the Going Merry, sailing on a calm, sun-drenched sea. The ship felt alive beneath his feet. He could hear its familiar creaks and groans, feel the gentle sway of its mast. Then, a voice, soft and sad, like the sigh of old wood, spoke in his mind. Thank you, Usopp. He spun around. Standing by the mainmast was a small figure, draped in a rain slicker and carrying a small hammer. It was the Cloboterman, the incarnation of a ship's soul, the very spirit of the Mary. It was battered, its wooden body covered in cracks, but its smile was warm and full of affection. You always took such good care of me, the spirit whispered, its voice echoing in Usopp's soul. You fixed my railings, patched my hull. You were my best friend. Mary. Usopp breathed, tears instantly filling his eyes. I'm tired, Usopp, the Cloboterman said, its form flickering. I've sailed far. I've seen the sky. It has been a wonderful adventure. But my back is broken. I can't carry you any further. Please, let me rest. The vision was so real, so full of love and sorrow, that it shattered Usopp's heart. This was the truth he had been refusing to see, delivered not as a harsh diagnosis, but as a gentle, heartbreaking plea from the friend he was trying to save. The foundation of his rage, his belief that he was protecting the Mary, crumbled into dust. He wasn't protecting her. He was prolonging her suffering. The vision faded. He was back on the cold, windswept beach. Luffy's hand was still on his forehead. Usopp's legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, not from a blow, but from the crushing weight of the truth. He let out a raw, agonized sob, the fight completely gone from him, replaced by a profound, soul-deep grief. He had been defeated. Not by a punch, but by empathy. Luffy looked down at his weeping friend, his own heart heavy. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Usopp to his sorrow on the shore. The aftermath of the duel left the crew fractured and grieving. Their mood was not improved when, the very next day, the 300 million berries they had brought for the new ship vanished, stolen by their temporary allies, the Frankie family, a crew of local ship dismantlers. To top it all off, Nico Robin disappeared, leaving a cryptic message that she would not be returning. The truth, when it came, was a sledgehammer blow. Robin had willingly surrendered herself to an unknown enemy to save them. The world government's deadliest assassins, Cypher Pole No. 9, had been operating in secret in Water 7. Their mission, to retrieve the blueprints for the ancient weapon Pluton, which were held in trust by Iceberg, and to capture Nico Robin to force her to read the poneglyphs that would lead them to the weapon itself. The Frankie family's leader, Frankie, was Iceberg's estranged brother in spirit and the secret inheritor of the blueprints. It all culminated in a dramatic confrontation at the Galila headquarters. The crew, battered and betrayed, learned that Robin had made a deal, her life in exchange for their safe passage from the island. She was being taken to Eni's lobby, the Judiciary Island, from which no prisoner ever returned. The crew was at its lowest point. Broken, betrayed, robbed, and about to lose a crewmate to the most powerful organization in the world. They were adrift, rudderless. It was Nami who rallied them. She stood before the assembled remnants of the Frankie family and the shipwrights of Galila, her face set like stone. The grief from Usopp's departure, the sting of the robbery, the fear for Robin's life, she channeled it all into a cold, burning resolve. "They think they can just take one of us," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a fury that silenced the chaotic room. "They think they can use her life as a bargaining chip against us. They think we will run away with our tails between our legs." She looked at Luffy, at Zoro, at Sanji, at Chopper. She saw their despair, but underneath it, she saw the same fire that burned in her. "They have made a mistake," Nami declared, her voice rising with every word, becoming a proclamation. "They have mistaken a member of my crew for a pawn. They have mistaken our navigator for a simple historian. They have underestimated our will." She turned to face the crowd, her gaze sweeping over them, commanding their attention. She was no longer just a navigator. She was a monarch on the verge of war. "My name is Nami," she said, her voice echoing with the weight of her stolen bounty poster. "And I will be queen of the pirates. That," she pointed to the straw hat Jolly Roger that Luffy wore, "the flag that now represented her ambition, is my flag. And we are going to get our historian back." She paused, letting the impossible weight of her next word settle. "We are declaring war on the world government." The declaration was insane. It was suicide. But it was delivered with such absolute, unshakable conviction that no one laughed. No one scoffed. They simply stared in awe at the orange-haired woman who had just drawn a line in the sand against the entire world. Luffy, who had been silent through the whole ordeal, a storm of emotions warring within him, looked at Nami. He saw not the girl he'd saved in Kokoyashi, but the queen he had promised to crown. She had not faltered. She had not broken. She had risen to the challenge. His belief in her, his promise to her, solidified into an unbreakable law of his universe. His three tails blazed to life, the blue flames burning with a fierce, joyful light. A wide, familiar, world-shaking grin spread across his face. The war was on. And he, the first mate of the pirate queen, was ready to burn the world down to see her will done. But their enemy was already in motion. On a heavily armored marine vessel sailing toward Enies lobby, High Admiral Kageyama stood on the deck, the wind whipping his immaculate white coat. He was not pursuing Luffy. His presence here was for a different, more personal reason. He was personally overseeing the transport of the key to the world's destruction, Nico Robin. The Azura Protocol was not just about hunting the Kitsune, it was about securing absolute control over all divine and demonic threats. And the power to read the poneglyphs was the ultimate threat of chaos. He felt it, then. A spike of will, of defiant energy, from Water 7. It was the Kitsune, but it was centered around the fiery, ambitious spirit of the navigator. A declaration of war. Kageyama looked across the churning sea toward the island, a flicker of something resembling respect in his cold eyes. The fox was not just a mindless beast. It had found its purpose. It had found its heart. And he, the Azura, would be there at Enies lobby to rip it out. The final confrontation was set. The Queen's Gambit had become a battle for the soul of the world. Chapter 8, The Azura's Judgment. The sea train, the Rocketman, was a scream of defiance made steel and steam. It was a prototype, untested and unstable, but it was their only chance. It hurtled across the waves on tracks submerged by the rising Aqua Laguna, a metal beast chasing the government vessel carrying Robin to her doom. On board, the atmosphere was electric. This was not a rescue mission, it was an invasion. Nami stood at the front of the lead car, the wind tearing at her hair, a map of Enies lobby spread before her on a makeshift table. She was no longer a navigator charting a course to an island, she was a general plotting the siege of a fortress. Enies lobby is not a normal island, she briefed them, her voice sharp and clear over the roar of the engine. It's a judicial stronghold, a symbol of the world government's power. It's connected to Marine headquarters and impelled down by a massive gate, the Gates of Justice. Our window is small. We hit them fast, we hit them hard, and we get Robin before she passes through those gates. Once she's on the other side, she's lost to us forever. Her plan was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos, designed to leverage their small number and unique skills against an army. Frankie, the shipwright-turned ally who had built this very train, would handle the frontal assault, his cyborg body a walking piece of artillery. Sanji, the spy, would infiltrate the main tower, his mission to secure a route to the Gates of Justice. Zoro, the swordsman, was tasked with creating a massive diversion, drawing the attention of the island's thousands of soldiers by taking on their strongest fighters. Chopper was the mobile medic, ready to treat the inevitable injuries. And Luffy? Zoro asked, his hand resting on his swords. Nami looked at Luffy. He was sitting on the roof of the train car, his legs crossed, his eyes closed. He seemed to be meditating, his three fiery tails swaying in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. He wasn't just her weapon anymore. He was her judgment. Luffy goes straight for the top, Nami said, her voice dropping. CP9. He won't fight the fodder. He won't get bogged down. He will cut the head off the snake. His only target is Rob Lucci and whoever else stands between him and Robin. It was a declaration of overwhelming confidence in his power. She wasn't holding him back. She was aiming him like a missile. Luffy opened his eyes. He looked at Nami, and a slow, confident grin spread across his face. He understood. He gave her a sharp nod. As Enies lobby loomed on the horizon, a fortress of towers and walls under a sun that never set, a lone figure stood on the tracks before them. It was Usopp. He wore a strange mask and a red cape, calling himself Sogeking, the king of snipers. He couldn't swallow his pride enough to ask to rejoin, but he couldn't abandon his friends, either. He had come to fight. Luffy looked at him, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, his grin widened. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, an acknowledgement. The king of snipers was welcome in this war. The crew, though still fractured, was whole again in purpose. The assault on Enies lobby was a symphony of destruction. Frankie smashed through the outer gates with the sheer force of the rocketman. Zoro, with a feral roar, charged into the main body of the marine garrison, his three swords a whirlwind of death, drawing thousands of soldiers to him like moths to a flame. Sanji, a blur of black, kicked his way into the Tower of Law, disabling guards with surgical precision. Luffy, however, did not participate in the initial chaos. He stood on the shore, watching his crew execute their parts of the plan. He was waiting. Nami, from her command post on the sea train, was his eyes and ears, feeding him information via a small den mushi. CP9 is in the tower with Spandam and Robin, Nami's voice crackled. They're moving toward the Bridge of Hesitation. That's your target, Luffy. Go. Luffy's demeanor changed. The calm patience vanished, replaced by a terrifying, focused intensity. He took a single step, and the ground beneath his foot cracked. He didn't run. He launched himself forward, a red and blue blur that was impossible to track. He moved with the fluid, silent grace of a fox, flowing through the battlefield, ignoring the lesser fights. Marines who tried to intercept him found themselves swinging at afterimages or being knocked aside by a casual flick of a fiery tail. He reached the Tower of Law just as Sanji kicked down the door to the upper floors. He gave his cook a quick grin and then shot past him, a comet of pure purpose. He was a force of nature that would not be denied. He found them on the Bridge of Hesitation, the long, windswept walkway that connected the tower to the gates of justice. Spandam, the sniveling, cruel director of CP9, was dragging Robin by her hair, a sadistic sneer on his face. The assassins of CP9, led by the stoic, pigeon-loving Rob Lucci, stood as a final line of defense. "You're too late, Straw Hat." Spandam shrieked, holding a blade to Robin's throat. "The gates are opening. Your precious historian is ours." Robin looked at Luffy, her eyes filled with a familiar, soul-deep despair. She had been running her whole life. She believed her existence only brought pain to those around her. "Go, Luffy," she cried out, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to live. Just let me die." Luffy skidded to a halt. He looked past the assassins, past Spandam, his gaze locked on Robin. He saw her pain, her fear, the crushing weight of a life spent as a monster in the eyes of the world. "Sogeking!" Luffy roared, his voice booming across the bridge, amplified by his own power. From the top of the distant Tower of Law, Usopp, in his Sogeking persona, raised his new giant slingshot, the Kabuto. "I am here." "Shoot down that flag," Luffy commanded, pointing a single, steady finger at the massive, blue flag of the world government that flew proudly above the tower. Usopp didn't hesitate. He loaded a special projectile, a bird carrying a powerful explosive. With a mighty yell, he fired. The shot was incredible, a pinpoint of light arcing across the sky. It struck the flagpole dead center. The explosion ripped the flag to shreds, its tattered remains fluttering down into the abyss. It was an act of unthinkable treason. A declaration of war made manifest. "Robin!" Luffy bellowed, his voice raw with emotion. "I haven't heard it from your own mouth yet. Say you want to live." The world seemed to hold its breath. Robin stared at him, at her crew arrayed against the world for her sake. The dam of her lifelong despair finally broke. "I want to live," she screamed, her voice a raw, cathartic cry of desperate hope. "Take me to the sea with you." Luffy's grin returned, brighter than the sun. "That's all I needed to hear." He turned to CP9. "You heard her." But before he could take a step, a presence descended upon the bridge that dwarfed even Lucci's murderous aura. It was a cold, absolute pressure, the feeling of a mountain materializing from thin air. High Admiral Kageyama landed softly on the bridge, his white coat unstirred by the wind. He had not come on a ship. He had simply arrived. His 6 arms were folded behind his back, his face a mask of cold, divine judgment. "Monkey D. Luffy," Kageyama said, his voice the sound of worlds grinding to a halt. "Your chaotic rebellion ends here." Lucci and the other CP-9 agents took an involuntary step back, their own formidable presences utterly eclipsed. They were assassins. This was a god. Kageyama's gaze was fixed on Luffy, but his words were for Robin. "Demon of O'Hara. You are a key to a power that invites chaos. You will be placed under my personal jurisdiction, where your knowledge can be contained for eternity." He then turned his full, crushing attention to Luffy. "And you, the Kitsune. Your power is divine. It is meant to enforce reality, not bend it for the whims of a greedy child. You have declared war on order itself. There is no greater sin." Luffy's 3 tails burned with a fierce, defiant light. "Nami wants her back," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "So I'm taking her. Your queen's decree is meaningless before the law of the world," Kageyama stated. He unfolded his 6 arms, his posture shifting into a terrifying martial stance. "Join me. Your power could be used to forge an era of true, absolute peace. An end to all suffering, all conflict, under one unshakable will." Luffy just laughed. It was his old, carefree, joyous laugh, a sound of pure freedom that was a deafening insult to everything Kageyama stood for. "That sounds boring. Nami's dream is way more fun." Kageyama's eyes narrowed. "So be it." He moved. He was not just fast, he was omnipresent. His 6 arms became a blur, a storm of precise, devastating strikes. Each fist carried the conceptual weight of order. Luffy tried to throw up an illusion, but Kageyama's unique haki, and Azura's gaze, pierced it before it could even form. It didn't just see through the lie, it annihilated it. Luffy met the storm head-on. It was a battle of 2 opposing divinities. Luffy was chaos, freedom, and unpredictability. Kageyama was order, control, and absolute law. The bridge of hesitation became their battleground, the steel groaning and buckling under the force of their blows. Kageyama created zones of order around himself, shimmering fields of reality where Luffy's chaotic powers simply fizzled out. Inside these zones, shape-shifting was impossible, illusions were stillborn, and even the Kitsune struggled to burn. Kageyama was systematically dismantling Luffy's arsenal, forcing him into a pure, physical confrontation. But Luffy was still the son of Dragon, the grandson of Garp. He was a brawler at heart. He fought with a ferocity that stunned even the Azura. But it wasn't enough. Kageyama's 6 arms allowed him to attack and defend simultaneously, a perfect engine of combat. He landed blow after blow, each one a sermon against chaos, each strike chipping away at Luffy's will. Luffy was bleeding, bruised, his movements becoming sluggish. He felt a surge of power, a 4th tail erupting from his back in a desperate attempt to match Kageyama's strength, but even that wasn't enough. The Azura was simply on another level. He was being taken apart, piece by piece. "Your chaos is finite," Kageyama intoned, his fist crashing into Luffy's gut. "My order is eternal." From the sea train, Nami watched through a spyglass, her heart in her throat. She saw Luffy faltering. She saw the overwhelming power of the High Admiral. Her plan, her brilliant gambit, had a fatal flaw: she had not accounted for the presence of a god. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight him. She couldn't outpower him. But a Kitsune was a trickster. And she was its queen. A queen of tricksters. She grabbed her upgraded perfect climatact, a gift from Usopp. It was a masterpiece of weather science. She looked at the churning, unnatural sea of the Aqua Laguna, at the thick, humid air. She saw her weapon. Luffy needs a distraction, she yelled to Frankie. The biggest one you can think of. Frankie grinned. Coup de burst it is. Back on the bridge, Luffy was on his knees. Kageyama stood over him, one of his 6 hands raised for the final, decisive blow. It is over. Suddenly, a massive, unnatural fog bank rolled in from the sea. It was thick, wet, and crackling with static electricity. It wasn't normal fog, it was a weather bomb of Nami's creation, mirage tempo on a gigantic scale, infused with sea salt and electrical charges to disrupt even sensory hockey. For a single, critical second, even Kageyama's Azura's gaze was blinded, his perception filled with a million false electrical signals. He couldn't see. He couldn't sense. He was, for the first time in the fight, mortal. It was the only opening Luffy needed. The Queen had saved her champion. He didn't try to get up. He poured every last ounce of his remaining strength, his will, his promise to Nami, into one final attack. The 4 tails behind him blazed, then merged, funneling their energy into his fist. He channeled the Kitsune spirit, not as a trickster, but as a guardian, a divine beast protecting its den. The attack wasn't a punch. It was an exorcism. He slammed his fist into the stone of the bridge beneath Kageyama's feet. Guardian Fox Art, world-breaking pillar. A geyser of pure, compressed celestial energy, blue and gold, erupted from the ground. It wasn't aimed at Kageyama. It was aimed at his foundation. It was an attack on the very concept of the unshakable ground he stood on. The bridge of hesitation, a monument to the world government's unyielding justice, shattered. Kageyama was thrown off balance, not by the force, but by the sheer chaotic wrongness of the attack. It was an assault on the very idea of order. In that moment of disorientation, Luffy, using the last of his strength, sprang up and landed one clean, desperate blow, a headbutt, infused with a flicker of Conqueror's haki, square in the center of Kageyama's chest. It wasn't enough to defeat him. Not even close. But it cracked the divine facade. A thin trickle of blood, red and mortal, dripped from the corner of Kageyama's lip. He stared at it, his mind unable to comprehend the imperfection. He had been wounded. The chaos was their cover. Frankie unleashed the coup de burst from their new, unfinished ship that he had stowed on the train, launching it into the air. The rest of the crew, having defeated their own opponents, scrambled aboard. Zoro, carrying a battered Luffy, made the final leap. Kageyama, his composure shattered, moved to stop them, but it was too late. He could only watch as the ship, a vessel powered by dreams and cola, sailed through the air, over the gates of justice, and back to the free sea. They had done it. They had declared war on the world, and they had won. A few days later, they rendezvoused back at Water 7. Their new ship, a magnificent brigantine of atom wood, was complete. Frankie, its builder, had officially joined their crew. They named it the Thousand Sunny. As they prepared to set sail, a familiar figure waited for them at the shore. Usopp, his mask gone, his face bruised but resolute, stood with his bag packed. "Please," he said, tears in his eyes, his voice choked with shame. "Can I come back?" Luffy, his arm in a sling, a wide, happy grin on his face, stretched out his hand. "What are you talking about, you idiot? Hurry up." The crew was whole again. As the Thousand Sunny sailed away from Water 7, Nami stood on the deck, her first bounty poster in hand. Queen Nami. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise. Beside her, Luffy stood, his 4 ethereal tails swaying gently in the sea breeze. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, and on her. The world now knew their names. They knew of the Pirate Queen and her demonic first mate. Their war was just beginning, and the sea had never seemed so full of promise. High Admiral Kageyama, standing in the ruins of Eni's lobby, touched the corner of his mouth where he had bled. The chaos had a face. It had a will. And the Azura now had a rival. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.